Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock on today's show. Hate not welcome here. The chant heard across the country where anti-racism protesters countered planned rallies by the far right.
Plus, in the last hour, the Met Police Commissioner says shows of force and unity defeated the challenges the UK has seen over the past week.
That's as the Prime Minister warns swift action will be taken for those provoking violent disorder. We'll be speaking to the Policing Minister, Dame Diana Johnson.
It's Thursday, the 8th of August. Your headlines. Thousands of counter-protesters gathered to protect targets of anti-immigration protests after days of rioting. The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's world tour is cancelled after arrests of 2 men over a suspected terror plot. Joe Biden says he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Donald Trump loses the US election. Also this morning, why hundreds of patients living with a rare blood disorder have been given hopes of a cure. And another big day for Team GB in Paris as Matthew Hudson-Smith secures a silver in the 400-metre final. A very good morning to you. Our top story. Hate not welcome here was the phrase heard at counter-protests across the country as thousands of anti-racism demonstrators gathered to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. Shops were boarded up, immigration law firms shut, and about 6,000 riot-trained police drafted in after warnings of more than 100 far-right rallies. But instead of the violence seen over recent days, streets remained mostly calm, as our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin now reports.
They'd braced themselves for a night of trouble, but in the end it was a largely peaceful evening. Here in Liverpool, they'd boarded up the windows of this asylum centre, fearing a protest by far-right groups would descend into violence. Instead, it was surrounded not by those who wished it harm, but by those determined to protect it.
There's a lot of people in the community here who, feel a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and I think there's the sense of the community where they've had enough. There's also a sense of distrust with the police. A lot of people don't trust the police to defend their neighbourhood, and that's why a lot of them have come out.
Black and white, unite and fight!
It was a similar story elsewhere. In Birmingham, anti-racism campaigners marched through the streets.
We've got people from all walks of life. This is what reality looks like. We don't want their reality, we want this reality, because this is about peace, love, unity and harmony.
In Bristol, hundreds gathered to repel the planned protests by far-right led groups.
This is how it should be. Everyone should be united together, all as one.
Yeah. How do you feel about the scenes that we've seen over the last week or so across the country?
I think it's disgraceful, yeah. Absolutely disgraceful, yeah, and it needs to stop.
In Brighton, the feared disruption didn't materialise. The far right did turn out in much smaller numbers than expected at a border force agency in Portsmouth, blocking a road before being moved away by riot police. And thousands of anti-racist demonstrators gathered at an immigration centre in Walthamstow. No clashes here.
It's hard to see how anybody could even get remotely close to this building to do any kind of damage. This community has turned out in their hundreds to mount the most extraordinary defence of this former church.
It could have been the threat of stiff prison sentences handed out to previous rioters. It could have been the increased police presence. If the far right were here, they didn't show themselves. But that is not to say that this is over. Nick Martin, Sky News, Liverpool.
Let's get more with Mari on all of this now. And Mari, it's interesting watching that package. The tone of the package somewhat improved from many of the packages we've watched as first reports each morning for the last 8 or 9 days. It remains to be seen if that's in any lasting way, and it remains to be seen if it spreads out across the day from politicians as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right that the tone really has shifted and the focus has shifted. The focus started very much on the violence and the disorder and the law breaking. And now the focus is more on communities, unity, and that alternative narrative, as it were, which I think, obviously, especially the counter-protesters will be very pleased about, that they are the subject of conversation rather than the rioters that we saw previously. And really, this is evidence to an extent, you could argue, that Keir Starmer's plan is working when it comes to the different weapons in his arsenal, alongside with the police and the judiciary, to disincentivise and prevent further violence. So we saw those large counter-protests, and those numbers and the size of them will have potentially been a disincentive in themselves if you're a small group of far-right protesters. But also, you know, the speed at which people were arrested, the speed at which people have been prosecuted and sent to jail, and the photos that we've seen plastered all over our screens and our newspapers, that also is going to be sticking in people's minds, as well as that threat that was looming over some protesters or rioters around the possibility of being charged with terrorism offences. That as well potentially could have contributed. So all of these things together appear to have had that deterrent effect. And I think we can hear a clip of the Met Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, speaking in reaction to the lack of disorder, really.
It was a massive policing operation. I'm really pleased with how it went. And we put thousands of officers on the street, and I think the show of force from the police and, frankly, the show of unity from communities together defeated the challenges that we've seen. And it went off very peacefully last night. A couple of locations we had some local criminals turn out and try and create a bit of antisocial behaviour, and we arrested a few of them. But it was a very successful night, and the fears of sort of extreme right disorder were abated. So a successful operation thanks to communities and police.
So you can see the tone from Mark Rowley, as you said, very different. Remember there was that clip a couple of days ago where he was walking out of an emergency Cobra meeting, grabbing the Sky News mic, throwing it on the floor, clearly exasperated, frustrated, and then had to apologise for that. Now, you know, smiling in that clip and praising communities for essentially coming out and showing, you know, love and solidarity, rather than what other people would argue was more aggression or hatred. And so I think you're absolutely right to say the tone has really shifted. One thing that I find fascinating, just on a side note, is we had some fresh YouGov polling come out yesterday afternoon, and it found that actually, for the first time since 2016, immigration is now the #1 priority for people who are being surveyed, for the public. So that is, in 8 years, the first time that immigration has now been voted as the top issue facing the country. And that's up a 10-point lead compared to the last survey, less than 3 weeks before that. And another fascinating element of that polling, in terms of public view and public opinion that's being shaped by these riots, is that also crime is now up in terms of the public psyche and what they think is the most important issue facing the country. That's up a 19-point increase as well. So crime and immigration have now suddenly soared in the kind of the psyche of the general public, and that is, I think, something that might be quite fascinating to watch just moving forward.
It's really, really interesting. I also wonder, just as a side point, the extent to which the economy has slipped as a priority might imply people are feeling like the economy, only marginally perhaps, has turned a corner, and again leads to that point about when the election was called.
Well, we had that interest rate cut, which again would have been fabulous news for the Conservatives had they not already called the election, so they didn't get the benefit of that. You know, they like to shout and say, oh, that's thanks to us, but no one's really listening at the moment, especially when the Conservative Party are focused on their own leadership race rather than actually economic policy.
Interestingly as well, on the tone, by the way, with Sir Mark Rowley, we don't even have to go back that week ago comment. Just yesterday, his comment that we played was very clear, it was very sharp, it was slamming anyone who was talking about two-tier policing. And it is amazing to see the snapshot and difference tone in the space of 24 hours. Murray, great stuff. Thanks so much more from Murray throughout the day. Of course, we'll be speaking to Dame Diana Johnson, the Minister for Policing, in 10 minutes or so, and next hour, Mel Stride from the Conservatives. Meanwhile, Shabnam Freeman-Powell standing by for us in Walthamstow. The scene of one of the biggest counter-protests overnight. Shabnam, talk to us about the vibe there. Mari and I were just talking about how it's a different tone to most of the last 8 or 9 days. Is that what you sense as well?
Definitely, yes. Yesterday, Walthamstow was one of the places where the police had been braced for potential violence, some of the violence that we'd seen throughout the course of the previous week. But instead, places like here in Walthamstow became large counter demonstrations, which saw thousands of people gathering here, but to stand up to racism, as they say, chanting slogans such as refugees are welcome here and holding banners saying things like save say no to the far right. It comes as many shops had closed up and boarded up, and people left work early out of fear of facing some of the violent demonstrations. But instead, we saw huge counter demonstrations, not just here in Walthamstow, but in Bristol, in Brighton, in Liverpool and in Sheffield too. But here in Walthamstow was one of the largest counter demonstrations, with the police saying that it did pass without any major incident or disruption. However, we did see some pockets of what we will call far-right protests. We saw them in Portsmouth, near a border force agency in Portsmouth. Some people there holding up banners saying "Save our kids" and chanting some of the same sort of sentiments there. In Aldershot as well, officers said that they had to separate some opposing protesters as tempers did flare. And in Bristol, one arrest was made after a brick was thrown at a police vehicle. But largely speaking, given the anticipation of some of the violent disorder, the police will be happy across the country that actually it was fairly peaceful, with instead large counter demonstrations taking place.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that. And it looks like it's a beautiful day out there, so much so that a bus suddenly took the sunlight away from you, or was it the lights went out? What was that?
I think it may have been a bus. We are stood next to quite a busy road as people start waking up here in Walthamstow. But as you say, it is a beautiful day, which is why I'm not complaining that I'm stood outside so early.
We'll take the gremlin in the shot for a moment in a trade-off for such a beautiful day. Enjoy it. We'll see you again next hour. Shimon, great stuff as always. Thank you very much. Time for all of the day's other top stories now. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you very much. We're starting with Taylor Swift because her upcoming concerts in Vienna have been cancelled after two men were arrested over an alleged terror plot. Austria's Chancellor has described it as a bitter disappointment, but they thanked the police for their action. Here's our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer.
Welcome to the Eras Tour.
She is the biggest star in the world on the highest grossing concert tour of all time. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour currently on its European leg, attracting the attention of millions of fans and also, according to Austrian authorities, an alleged target for two individuals who appeared to be plotting a terror attack. The singer was due to play 3 nights at Vienna's Ernst Happel Stadium over the coming days, a big venue which can fit around 65,000 people. Now cancelled after authorities arrested a 19-year-old man, suggesting Swift's shows had been the focus of the plot, describing the man as someone who'd been radicalised on the internet. A second person also detained, who it's believed had been in contact with the suspect. In a statement, the concert's organisers explained, with confirmation from government officials of a planned terrorist attack, we have no choice but to cancel the 3 scheduled shows for everyone's safety. Fans who were excited, disturbed to learn of what could have been on the cards. For the singer, it is already a troubling, traumatic time, coming after the Southport killings at a Taylor Swift dance event. On social media, she said she was at a complete loss for how to convey her sympathies. Processing that, and now this. Her team certainly wouldn't want to take any chances. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Vladimir Putin has described a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's southwestern Kursk region as a large-scale provocation. A state of emergency has been declared in the Kursk region of Russia, and Russia's foreign ministry says Ukrainian shelling has killed at least 2 people and injured 24 others. Ukrainian officials have remained silent about the scope of the operation. BAFTA is reviewing awards given to Hugh Edwards, but confirmed that the BBC can keep their award for the royal coverage of Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding, which was fronted by the former newsreader. Edwards admitted to making indecent images of children last week, with 7 of the 41 images being of the most serious type. He's due to be sentenced next month. At least 40 people have died and 5 people are missing in northern Yemen. And this is after heavy rainfall and flooding. More than 500 homes had to be evacuated and roads were blocked by the flooding in the Hodeidah province. The United Nations have said they're working to get aid to thousands of families affected. The number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded by a charity in Britain has doubled in a year. The Community Security Trust says there were nearly 2,000 incidents between July and June. Dave Rich is the head of the policy at the charity and says it is concerning.
This anti-Jewish hatred is affecting all parts of Jewish life in this country. It's affecting schools, universities, synagogues, and just ordinary people on the street or in workplaces. And it's really unacceptable that this kind of racism should affect ordinary Jewish life in what has for many years been a very happy and very active Jewish community. The fact that this is carried on for so long after the October 7th attack last year suggests it's not going to go away anytime soon, and that this reflects some kind of new reality for the community.
Now, hundreds of people in England with a life-limiting blood disorder are set to benefit from a world-first gene editing therapy after it was given the green light for use in the NHS. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has more on this. Thomas, talk to us about what gene editing is and why it's suddenly found this application here in such an encouraging way.
Yeah, so it's first being used for the blood disorder beta thalassemia. Now, they've inherited a faulty gene, which means they don't produce enough hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen around the body. And they suffer from overwhelming fatigue, and it also shortens their life expectancy. So they have to have regular blood transfusions every few weeks. But for the first time, the NHS has approved a technique called CRISPR, which is a highly precise gene editing treatment. It is called Casgevy, this particular treatment. And what happens is that doctors remove some of the stem cells that produce red blood cells in the body, then use effectively what are molecular scissors to cut the DNA, disabling the faulty gene, and then put the cells back into patients. And clinical trials show that 90% no longer needed a blood transfusion, certainly in at least a year. And that's why it's raising hopes of a cure if that continues. But it is extremely expensive. £1.6 million is the list price. And originally, the cost-effectiveness watchdog of the NHS said it just wasn't worth the money. But it's now done a deal with the manufacturers, a confidential discount and a special scheme that would allow 460 people over the age of 12 to have it on the NHS in England. But there is a but here. People with sickle cell are still waiting to hear whether they too will get access to this revolutionary treatment. And that is going to be a big problem for the NHS. Highly effective, but also highly expensive.
Thomas, thanks so much. And we're going to talk more about that story later in the show with Dr. Subhana Chakravarti, who's the consultant haematologist and advisor for NHS England on that topic. That's coming up at 7:30. Thomas Moore there for us. As you can see, though, with me in studio, Dame Diana Johnson, the policing minister, joining us to give the government's perspective on the very latest on the riots. Very good morning to you, Dame Diana. It was striking playing earlier in the show the latest comments from Sir Mark Rowley compared to just 24 hours ago, where he was very loudly and clearly calling out this idea of two-tier policing. Much more positive tone today. Do you think things have turned a corner overnight?
Well, I'm cautious, but I just want to say, first of all, that I want to pay tribute to the work of our police officers up and down the country over the last few days. Some of them have faced violence and abuse. They put themselves in harm's way on behalf of keeping us all safe. So I think we need to pay tribute to them. I also want to pay tribute to the leaders of the policing community, people like Sir Mark, for the role that they've played actually in bringing together the resources that we need to make sure those communities are safe. And I am cautious about what happened last night. It's good that we didn't see the level of disorder and criminality on our streets that we have in previous days. But obviously, this is just the start. There is now further intelligence of events during the next few days, and we need to see what happens there.
So only cautious, not cautiously optimistic? Is that a step too far?
Well, I think what's happened is that the presence of the police on our streets, combined with the consequences that people are now seeing for the actions that they've taken in terms of the criminal acts on the streets. So we've seen people arrested, over 400 people arrested. We've seen, I think, over 120 people charged. We're now seeing people actually in court being convicted and actually sentenced. Yesterday, there was the case of the man who'd punched a police officer in Southport last week, getting 3 years. There are consequences for the criminality on our streets. And I think that swift justice that we're seeing is also helping to make people think twice about getting involved on the streets.
Whilst we're on the topic of the police, and you've commended the work that they've done very clearly, do you actually think that they have had enough resources, all the resources that they need over the last 10 days? There was so much debate about whether they'd been hollowed out or there aren't enough. But as we look back on things, did they have all that they needed?
Well, I think it's very important to remember that the Prime Minister convened a meeting in Downing Street last Thursday with all the senior chief constables to discuss this very point. Do the police have everything they need? Do they have the powers that they need? Do they have the resources? And it was clear from the conversation that I was sitting in that meeting and listening to that the police said, yes, they did. Now, clearly, we're 4 weeks into a Labour government. One of our promises in the manifesto was we want to increase police numbers in neighbourhood policing. We think that's been hollowed out over the last 14 years. We know we've got a lot of young officers in service because there was a massive cut to the police in the last 14 years. At the tail end of the previous government, they did increase numbers again, but that's a lot of young, inexperienced officers who are doing a remarkable job, I have to say. So I think there are some questions about how we go forward, making sure that our officers have the training and the leadership that they need. But I am really very proud of what the police have been able to do over the last few days, facing this level of criminality on some of the streets in our country.
I wanted to touch on social media, and it's been very clear, whether it was the Home Secretary or others, that it's played a big part in things. The government's advisor on political violence and disruption had warned that far-right actors almost certainly were being aided and abetted by hostile foreign states. Is that something that the government and you as Policing Minister have seen some evidence of, enough to want to really explore and investigate that in the weeks and months ahead?
I think that's something, obviously, across government that we are very concerned about. I know Peter Kyle, the Technology Secretary of State, is talking to the social media companies. He's been having a regular series of meetings over the last few weeks. We know, for instance, that the Online Safety Act, as it now is, there are provisions within that we want to see that social media companies acting on now. We don't want them to have to wait until they actually come into force. There is a bit of a delay, but those social media companies could take more action now. And in fact, Ofcom wrote to them just yesterday to say you need to get on with dealing with the misinformation, the disinformation that has been clearly on social media. Where that comes from, I mean, the extreme far right clearly are doing that. Others maybe as well. And that is something that government is looking at, clearly. I
wanted to touch on the comments made on this show yesterday by Robert Jenrick, which I'm sure you've seen coverage of. What did you make of his comments?
I think all politicians at this stage need to be very careful about the language that they use. The country, over the last few days, you know, the terrible events in Southport, I think the country has been very shocked by that tragic event, and then the public disorder that we've seen. So I think all politicians have a role in being moderate in their language, supporting the police, and speaking up on behalf of the law-abiding majority in this country. That's what I would say all politicians should be doing at this stage.
Do you feel like people have, for the most part, supported the police?
Yes, I do. I think there's a huge support for the police. I think the vast majority of people in this country are law-abiding and are horrified to see the criminality on the streets and the way that our police officers, our brave police officers, were being treated and attacked over the last week or so. I think the vast majority support the police, absolutely.
And I mean, specifically on politicians, we mentioned the Jenrick comment, but broadly, stepping back in this crazy 10 days that you've had as Policing Minister, that you've collectively had as government, coming so soon, of course, as well in your party's tenure in government. Do you feel like the vast majority of MPs have been backing you? The overall consensus has been moment of national unity coming together to back the Prime Minister and his decisions, or has it not been like that?
Yes, I think that the vast majority of members of Parliament understand that they need to stand for their communities, and the vast majority of the people in their communities who are law-abiding and tolerant. So I've done briefings with MPs, members of the House of Lords, cross-party, to try and ensure that all MPs understand what's happening, to feed in any questions that they have to the system. But the vast majority of MPs that I've been speaking to have been supportive of the action taken to clamp down on that criminality on our streets. I think obviously we're in the middle of a Conservative leadership election, and clearly there's positioning and posturing going on there. But I think my overall view is that members of Parliament are supportive of the action of the police and of the government.
Dame Diana Johnson, great to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by. To the US now, where President Joe Biden has said he's not confident of a peaceful transfer of power to Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris if Donald Trump loses the election in November. He made the comments during an interview with CBS News.
If Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath. Have be a stolen election. Look what they're trying to do now in the local election districts where people count the votes. They're putting people in place in states that they're going to count the votes, right? You can't love your country only when you win.
Meanwhile, the Vice President and her running mate, Tim Walz, have been speaking to voters in some of the key battlegrounds for November's election. The Harris-Walz campaign has raised more than $36 million since the Minnesota governor was announced as the Democrats' vice presidential pick. And it looks like the pair are now pulling ahead of Donald Trump in the polls. Here's our US correspondent, James Matthews.
They're fighting over the swing states, and it shows. As the Democratic ticket arrived at an airport in Wisconsin, so did the Republican vice president pick. He duly marched across the tarmac, aides in tow.
Anna, what do we know?
And it was all shaping up for a political showdown.
Fans accuse you of
until it wasn't.
Your response.
I did not speak to her. No, I think she was trying to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible.
This was day 2 of the Harris-Walz roadshow. Security conspicuous for the outdoor political rally.
As Tim Walz likes to point out, we are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors.
Philadelphia the night before had seen the introduction of the newly minted Democratic ticket.
Governor Tim Walz of the great state of Minnesota.
Kamala Harris chose the running mate they're calling America's dad.
My high school class was 24 people. I was related to half of them.
Tim Walz is the former teacher, National Guardsman, and current governor of Minnesota. The liberal-leaning plain speaker.
These guys are creepy, and yes, just weird as hell. Violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
This was the start of a familiarization tour of battleground states. In Philadelphia, home of the Rocky movies, for a party back in the fight.
He's definitely a family man and offers a different perspective than Kamala does.
I think he's a good choice for independents. I think it does provide balance.
He's the left choice.
Is that a good thing?
I guess so. We'll see.
The Republican choice of attack is the military service of Tim Walz. He ended it just before the unit he led deployed to Iraq.
I think it's shameful to prepare your unit to go to Iraq, to make a promise that you're going to follow through, and then to drop out right before you actually have to go.
Chemistry, we're told, was the priority in the partnership choice of Kamala Harris. She wants someone she can do business with in office. She has to get there first. Her choice of running mate is her big political decision. And her big political gamble. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
So to come on The Breakfast Show, as a life-changing gene therapy drug is approved for use on the NHS, we'll speak to a consultant hematologist, plus a patient who's already benefited from the treatment. Vladimir Putin described a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's southwestern Kursk region as a large-scale provocation. We'll speak to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll speak to a patient who's benefited from a world-first gene therapy, which has just been approved for use on the NHS. We'll also be going live to Kyiv with the Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik amongst reports of a Ukrainian incursion into Russian southwestern Kursk region. But first, time for the top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you very much, Wilfred Frost. Now, thousands of anti-racism demonstrators gathered across the country last night to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. More than 6,000 specialist police had been mobilised amid fears of a repeat of the violence seen around the country over the past week. The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's Eras tour has been cancelled after two men were arrested over an alleged terror plot said to be targeting the events. The pop star was due to play at the Austrian capital over the next 3 nights. US President Joe Biden has said he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Republican nominee Donald Trump loses the race to the White House. Speaking to CBS News, Mr. Biden referred to previous comments made by his predecessor, who suggested the only way he'd lose the election is if it's stolen from him. And a world-first gene therapy used to treat a life-limiting blood disorder will soon be available on the NHS. The Medicines Watchdog says the treatment could represent a potential cure for people living with a certain type of severe sickle cell disease, which could lead to then severe anaemia.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, I just want to pick up quickly.
I wasn't sure about that. Was it my line?
No, I think it was your line.
Okay,
I wanted to pick up on the Biden story, actually, which I'm going to do now, even though it's slightly out of order, because I do think there's an important thing to just note a difference on compared to 4 years ago, and I remember covering it all live when the January the 6th riots broke out, which is who's in power. So there might well be really bad protests or riots, something we all know a bit about at the moment, but there's a big difference to say that it might go down badly to there won't be a peaceful transition of power. And I think you've got to wash your words really carefully as President Biden talking about that, because he will still be in power until the inauguration. And I think that makes a game-changing difference to the situation we're in last time, where the person who was in power was the person who lost.
Yeah, and it shines the light on that peaceful transition of power that we saw from Rishi Sunak to Sir Keir Starmer. That made me feel really proud of politics for that window where it was very peaceful.
It was, and then they were very respectful of each other.
They were, and they actually said what they liked about one another. And I think Rishi Sunak was actually really incredibly gracious when he did lose, and he said that Starmer he was a good man and he had the best interests of the country at heart, and you wouldn't get that, I think, between Biden and Trump.
No, well, I mean, let's move that on then, Mara, because it sort of links us to one of the topics that came up with Dame Diana Johnson in relation to the Robert Jenrick comments yesterday, which was this a turning point in the riots of the last 10 days? Yesterday, well, we're going to now see both of the main parties start criticising each other as the main part of their commentary and the handling of all this, or was it still something where the main parties were broadly coming together and wanting to back the police? And I thought what she was saying there was pretty interesting. She said that was the broad feeling she got from most MPs, and sort of almost not excused or in any way, but said that there's a leadership battle going on and certain things get said.
Yeah, I think what is very clear is, for now, I think opposition MPs as well as Labour MPs, everyone is just trying to calm things down, and nobody really wants to be accused of stoking or exacerbating the problem. And so you've noticed things like, Suella Braverman's been very quiet, for instance. She's normally quite vocal about things, especially kind of anything vaguely in relation immigration linked. So certain voices have been quite quiet. I mean, Kemi Badenoch, for instance, Sky went to her team yesterday, asked for a reaction to those Jenrick lines. No, nothing. So you can see that some of these candidates are hoping that maybe they can capitalise on some of the issues we've seen over the past week, 10 days, to attack the Labour Party, but not yet. And I think timing is everything. And Diana Johnson was saying that for now, things are really quite... there is a consensus in Parliament, really, that everybody wants the police to succeed, everybody wants the Prime Minister to succeed. I think if and when the violence dies down and is, seen as being eradicated, anything of the past, I think we will start to see those kinds of attacks bubbling up, really.
Well, yeah, which is good. I mean, it doesn't have to be attacks, but it's, it's good if there's scrutiny after the fact and we sort of go through things. In terms of the tone, it was interesting. We were talking about it with the two Mark Rowley clips, and there's a huge change in tone over 24 hours. There was a change in tone here as well between the government over the last week and the government today. But she wouldn't even go as far as saying cautiously optimistic, just cautious.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so we've seen the government being really quite stern and, very stern-faced on the airwaves with yourself this week. And that's because they really want to give off that impression that they are in control, they've not lost control, and that they are collaborating with the relevant public services to make sure that they get a hold of this. Now that it appears potentially things have calmed down, as you say, the tone does slightly shift. But she did also say, which I thought was interesting, there was further intelligence of more events this week. So they are not going to want to put the cart before the horse and say, oh, look, it worked, it's all over, aren't we great, gold star, pat on the back. If we then see more unrest this week, they then have to slightly roll back on that, which I think is why they're being very, very cautious, very, very careful in case anything does bubble up. They can't then be seen to be kind of being too preemptive on their rhetoric.
Mark, great stuff, as always. Right, time for the latest on the Olympics from Paris. Rob Harris is there for us and sent this report.
In the Paris Velodrome, Team GB was on for a milestone medal. But which colour?
The Olympic team pursuit final.
So nearly gold, until Ethan Hayter lost control of his bike on the final lap.
Oh, and they're nearly hitting the deck!
Allowing Australia's men to claim the team pursuit title. And Britain's 1000th medal across all Summer and Winter Olympics was silver.
It's advantage Great Britain.
But the tally did keep rising.
There will be a place on the podium.
With bronze in the women's team pursuit. Then across at the Stade de France, hopes a 100-year wait for a British men's 400-metre Olympic champion would end.
Can he get there? It's Hall's gold!
Matthew Hudson-Smith was so close. Pipped at the finish by American Quincy Hall, and instead taking silver. George Mills is still chasing a medal in the 5,000 metres. But qualifying looked unlikely after being knocked down in this collision in a very heated heats, sparking a confrontation with French rival Hugo Hay. But there was a reprieve from the referee. After finishing 18th, Mills was reinstated and qualified for the final. But there was no final at the skateboarding for Andy McDonald, making his Olympic debut at 51.
Look at that scream of energy coming out.
And no gold for Team GB for a second successive day. But still more finals to come, and in track cycling, it is 4 medals from 4 events. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
But let's hear it from them.
This is how the medal table's looking at the start of day 13. United States on top, 27 golds, and I believe the most medals as well, 94 total. China second with 25 golds, Australia 18 golds in third, France is fourth, Great Britain fifth, 12 golds and 17 silvers. As you can see, that race for fourth place, incredibly tight though. Certainly still within our grasp. Looking pretty good. Are you of the view there that it should be counted on golds or total medals?
Total, for
Really?
sure. Yeah, because a bronze is still, you know.
So if I had to choose between the two, I'd say golds, but I think they should tier it and do a point
see.
system.
Okay.
10 points for gold, 4 maybe for silver, 1 for something like that.
I can see where you're coming from. I was looking back, because I keep hopping back to London 2012. We came third, Team GB, which was amazing back then. But let's hope there's a few more golds
I think the US and China have always been first and second
yeah,
for
completely.
the last sort of 4 or 5 Olympics. Anyway, switching focus now, more on that gene editing therapy story, which we discussed a little bit earlier, being introduced on the NHS for those who suffer with life-limiting blood disorders. I'm joined now by consultant haematologist Dr. Subhana Chakravorty and Abdul Qadir Akhtar, who received the new gene therapy as part of a clinical trial. A very good morning to you both. Thanks so much for joining us. Dr. Chakravorty, I'll start with you if I can. This is for only one particular blood disorder. Can you tell us a bit about what that is?
Yes, at the moment it is for the blood disorder called thalassemia. And it is, thalassemia is a condition which affects the person's ability to make functioning blood cells. So effectively, they suffer from anemia all their lives and are completely dependent on regular blood transfusions.
And Abdul, this was something you had?
Yeah.
How debilitating was it? How did it affect your life?
It was life-changing. Going from where I'm having transfusions from 6 months after birth up until the age of 23, and then changing over to having a normal life where I'm not reliant on having blood transfusions every 2 to 3 weeks. You're much more free, more active, more fit, and more healthier, and less reliant on medications to keep, such as iron, from hurting your bones, destroying your bones, your joints, doing a lot of damage to the body.
And Dr. Chakravorty, what is this therapy exactly?
So it is a really exciting advanced technology because it uses this technology called gene editing, CRISPR. And you may know that this technology was only awarded the Nobel Prize about 3 years ago. So to be able to bring that to patients and in the NHS is just fabulous. So what happens is that the bone marrow stem cells are collected from the patient. It then gets taken away to a laboratory where the editing happens. And during the process of editing, the genes are changed in those stem cells so that the stem cells are now able to make normal functioning hemoglobin. So once that those edited gene-edited stem cells are then returned to the patient after the genetic modification, and then allowed to grow within the patient. And then that's it. Then the patient is supported during that period of time because they need to receive some chemotherapy to sort of make space in the bone marrow for these new stem cells. But it's the patient's own stem cells returned to them after the technique.
Goodness me, Abdul, what was it like going through this treatment? Because you must have, imagined, be a bit scared, or how did you feel?
I wasn't really scared, but it was quite the experience. So the process initially, so in 2019, August time, went through the process of where the stem cells were taken out from the blood and separated. They went to the laboratories in a 6-month period. They were modified And then in February 2020, so after a week of chemotherapy, the body's immune, and then the stem cells the modified stem cells get put back in to the body. And yeah, and then it takes at least a few weeks for them to grow and just create a new habit for the body.
What is life like now, though?
Completely different from how it was. Completely different.
It's fantastic to hear that. And Dr. Chaudhri, is this something that can be applied? I mean, there's other similar blood diseases where it's not yet applying to, but when might that change? But also, gene editing therapy, can this be applied to all sorts of diseases? Maybe not immediately, but is there prospects of that?
Absolutely. So in answer to your first question, yes, we would really be hopeful that it is also available to patients with sickle cell disease, which is another hemoglobin disorder. And the beauty of this is that because it's a single gene issue, it's an issue with a single gene defect, as it were, gene therapy would really be the perfect answer to these. Which then brings me to your second question, that if there are single gene changes that causes disease, then gene therapy is a really good approach to change that, in some way affect, to make it better, essentially.
And I suppose, lastly, looking forward, is this something that you're quite positive about? Because it's an issue that affects ethnic minorities quite hugely.
Absolutely. I mean, to be able to have this and that too on the NHS is so good. We all know about all the health inequalities that have come to surface, particularly post-pandemic. And just to have this life-changing and also such cutting-edge technology on the NHS is going to be transformational. And this brings in a new innovation and technology, brings in more innovation and technology, more interest in the condition. More people will be knowing about it, more people want to be doing, research, medicine, they want to be nurses looking after patients. So it's only a good thing.
Well, I have one more science question, just quickly. I mean, if this is working by the gene editing to adapt Abdul's cells now, is it possible that you can eradicate the disease in future via gene editing so that nobody gets that faulty gene, if that's what it was, in the first place, or is that not possible?
I mean, anything is possible, to be honest. Right now, the technology is where you have to remove the stem cells, work on it outside, and then return it. People are now working on not having to do that, a simple injection, and it all happens inside the patient's body. In King's College London, where we work, there is a new technology where the unborn child's genetic makeup might be changed through similar, not the same, but similar technology. So you could, you're limited by your imagination and will, really.
Abdul, last word. I presume you would recommend this treatment to people who have similar things.
Of course, yeah.
It's changed your life?
It's done more than changing my life, honestly. Much more healthier and less reliant on anyone and any healthcare. Just you're more free, and no medicine, no treatment.
Thank you so much for coming on to share your story. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Chaudhri, keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Both so much for joining us. Lots more still coming on The Breakfast Show. After the break, we'll be talking to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik.
Conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Becky Johnson, a Sky News Midlands correspondent based here in Birmingham. Allegations of exploitation in Leicester's clothing factories aren't new. In fact, it's been an open secret in this city for years. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
We're getting more and more stabbings, and essentially I think it's more and more younger children.
Here in the diverse industrial heart of England, we hear from people who have real stories to tell.
Parents are going to complain like this.
These protests are being organised primarily by people who aren't parents at the school.
We have to be prepared that patients will die from this illness.
The River Severn is still rising, and people here in Ironbridge have been told it could go up by another metre. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. Moscow has said that 1,000 Ukrainian troops have entered Russia and that a state of emergency has been declared in the Kursk region. The Ukraine is yet to comment. Let's bring in Kira Rudik, the Ukrainian MP and leader of the Golos party. Thanks so much for joining us, Kira. Maybe we'll go back a step a little bit first of all. Can you give us an update on the latest situation in Kyiv? There's been a wave of drone attacks over the last week or so.
Good morning, Wilfred, and thank you so much for having me. Yes, indeed, the last week was very tough. We barely slept because of the amount of the air raid sirens and various attacks by drones, by missiles. And thank God that our air defense forces were able to take down the majority of the attacking pieces. However, it is still a terrifying situation when people cannot know that when they go to bed, they will wake up in the morning. This is why it is so critical to strengthen our air defense systems. And this is what we have been begging our allies for, to allow us to defend ourselves against the Russian missile attacks.
In terms of responses, as we mentioned in the intro, the reports of a counter-offensive in the Kursk region, what is your view as to the validity of that and whether it's legitimate either way, regardless of the pushback from President Putin?
Well, I think we all know better than to comment on what so-called President Putin is saying. But because of our military commandment here in Ukraine did not make any comments, I would not allow myself to make those comments either. But I think it is very clear that the one who is starting the war, killing innocent people, should expect that at some point the war would come to their door. And we are using all the capabilities that we have to defend ourselves and to push Russian forces as farther from our homes as possible. And we are absolutely sure that we are allowed to do that.
In terms of capabilities, you now have F-16s?
Yes, we do, and it is official. And remember how many times we were speaking on this program during the last 2.5 years when it was absolutely impossible to get F-16s to Ukraine. And right now, after a tremendous work by all our partners and many representatives of Ukraine, right now we officially have them. It's a huge path from absolute no to actually this step happening. We believe that when the amount of F-16s will be sufficient, right now it's just the first small batch, we will be much better in defending ourselves in the skies and not only protecting our forces at the battlefield, allowing them to fight better, but honestly to defend our people at their homes. This is the main goal. This is what is super crucial for us. And we are so grateful on behalf of all Ukrainian people to everyone who allowed this to happen.
Are you ready to use them and fly them?
Right now, there are some finalized trainings being conducted, but from what our officials are saying, yes, we are.
In terms of the broader outlook for aid coming from the West, are you fearful about the US election?
Of course we are. Of course, because when you hear some really radical statements that the war can be over in one day, I just want to warn everyone that it's just an attempt to find simple solutions for complicated problems. I do not think that this approach ever worked in history in a very good way. And of course, we are worrying here in Ukraine on how that would turn out for us. Especially, it is hard to explain to people who are fighting at the battlefield right now what it all can be about. But we do really hope that while certain politicians are in the rallies, they may do some, make some really loud promises. But when you are looking at the situation at the closer way, you will understand that it is not so simple. Also, it's a big question for all of us. How the world that we all want to live in should look like. Is it the power of law or the law of power? And we, as democracy, believe in the first one. And we have proven that we are fighting for democratic values and the rule of law. But we need to be very careful in appeasing the dictators and allowing them to get away with what they have committed.
Kira Rudik, thank you so much for joining us. Very much appreciated.
Thank you so much, and glory to Ukraine.
The MP from Kiev, Kira Rudik there. We have lots more to come at the top of the hour after this short break. Very good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, hate not welcome here. The chant heard across the country where anti-racism protesters countered planned rallies by the far right.
Plus, the Met Police Commissioner insists shows of force and unity defeated the challenges the UK has seen over the past week.
But the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson, tells this programme we should be cautious in thinking violent scenes are over, with further demonstrations expected in the next few days.
It's Thursday, the 8th of August. Your headlines. Thousands of counter-protesters gather to protect targets of anti-immigration protests after days of rioting.
The show of force from the police and, frankly, the show of unity from communities together defeated the challenges that we've seen.
The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's world tour is cancelled after the arrests of 2 men over a suspected terror plot. Joe Biden says he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Donald Trump loses the US election. Hundreds of patients living with a rare blood disorder have been given hopes of a cure. And another big day for Team GB in Paris as Matthew Hudson-Smith secures a silver in the 400 metres final. A very good morning to you. Our top story, hate not welcome here, was the phrase heard at counter-protests across the country as thousands of anti-racism demonstrators gathered to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. Shops were boarded up, immigration law firms shut, and about 6,000 riot-trained police drafted in after warnings of more than 100 far-right rallies. But instead of the violence seen over recent days, streets remain mostly calm, as our people and politics correspondent Nick Martin now reports.
They'd braced themselves for a night of trouble, but in the end it was a largely peaceful evening. Here in Liverpool, they'd boarded up the windows of this asylum centre, fearing a protest by far-right groups would descend into violence. Instead, it was surrounded not by those who wished it harm, but by those determined to protect it.
There's a lot of people in the community here who, feel a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and I think there's the sense of the community where they've had enough. There's also a sense of distrust with the police. A lot of people don't trust the police to defend their neighbourhood, and that's why a lot of them have come out.
It was a similar story elsewhere. In Birmingham, anti-racism campaigners marched through the streets.
We've got people from all walks of life. This is what reality looks like. We don't want their reality. We want this reality, because this is about peace, love, unity and harmony.
In Bristol, hundreds gathered to repel the planned protests by far-right-led groups.
This is how it should be. Everyone should be united together, all as one.
Yeah. How do you feel about the scenes that we've seen over the last week or so across the country?
I think it's disgraceful, yeah. Absolutely disgraceful, yeah, and it needs to stop.
In Brighton, the feared disruption didn't materialise. The far right did turn out in much smaller numbers than expected at a border force agency in Portsmouth, blocking a road before being moved away by riot police. And thousands of anti-racist demonstrators gathered at an immigration centre in Walthamstow. No clashes here.
It's hard to see how anybody could even get remotely close to this building to do any kind of damage. This community has turned out in their hundreds to mount the most extraordinary defence of this former church.
It could have been the threat of stiff prison sentences handed out to previous rioters. It could have been the increased police presence. If the far right were here, they didn't show themselves. But that is not to say that this is over. Nick Martin, Sky News, Liverpool.
Mari's here to discuss all of the very latest. And Mari, we played last hour some Mark Rowley's comments, and they had changed in tone over the last 24 hours. Clearly, the tone in the Nick's report there was clear to see as well. We'll see now if that changes as well the politicians' debate, or whether there's still overriding caution towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really interesting, that Mark Rowley clip where he was, smiling, he was praising police, he was praising communities for coming out, for the fact that everything was so peaceful, and he, probably looked quite relieved. to be honest, considering the amount of criticism, especially we were talking about yesterday, that criticism of two-tier policing, and he was quite frustrated with those accusations, calling them nonsense. And so I think the tone is going to start to shift. So Diana Johnson this morning on the programme speaking to you, now she was, you couldn't even say cautiously optimistic, which is what you asked her, wasn't it? She was saying she'd be cautious, but clearly the government are going to be massively relieved this morning to find out that, you know, there aren't more buildings that have been burnt down or police officers who are potentially hospitalised. And therefore, that is going to be a win for the government and a win for Keir Starmer for now. But I think what was interesting, and I think we can have a listen, is Diana Johnson was nonetheless warning about, you know, the fact that the UK is not out of the woods yet, and we could potentially see more events. So have a listen to this.
I am cautious about what happened last night. It's good that we didn't see the level of disorder and criminality on our streets that we have in previous days. But obviously this is just the start. There is now further intelligence of events during the next few days, and we need to see what happens there.
So Diana Johnson there explaining that for now things are looking good, but let's see. I think the interesting line was the fact that she's saying we could see more of these events coming this week, and there is intelligence to suggest that. So therefore, I think people are still going to want to be careful in assuming that the fight has been won, as it were, politically speaking. But I think, nonetheless, there will be huge sighs of relief in Number 10 this morning. And I think that if things remain peaceful, this has actually been a huge test for Keir Starmer, and therefore, potentially, he may have passed his first test quite well. Let's not forget he was Director of Public Prosecutions back in the London riots in 2011. And clearly, from what we're seeing so far, it looks like that experience is paying off.
Right, great stuff. And we'll get your reaction to the Mel Stride interview, which is to come in about 10 minutes' time, the Tory leadership contender and shadow pension secretary coming up shortly. Meanwhile, the Northern Ireland Assembly will be recalled today to discuss violent scenes in Belfast. Let's get more with our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins. David, talk to us about the significance of recalling Parliament and why they're doing it. How bad have the protests, the riots, the violence been?
Well, even before the Assembly recall takes place, the Stormont Executive, that's the equivalent of the Cabinet in Northern Ireland, will meet to discuss the recent disorder. Ministers will be briefed by the Chief Constable, John Boucher, and that comes after the Police Service of Northern Ireland requested additional support from officers in Great Britain under mutual aid. Now, that's not an uncommon request. During periods of disorder in Northern Ireland, it was last made during President Biden's visit to Northern Ireland last year, but it may not be so easily granted given that the disorder is taking place right across the United Kingdom. And following the meeting of the Executive, as you say, the Northern Ireland Assembly has been recalled from its summer recess. Members will debate a motion condemning the recent violence and rejecting all forms of Islamophobia, xenophobia and racism, and also commending police and other public sector bodies for the efforts they're making to keep communities safe. Last night we did see some more violence, not on the same scale, and a further 6 people were charged, 3 men and 3 boys, one just 14 years old, all now facing accusations of riotous behaviour.
David Blevins, thank you so much for that. Let's get an update of the situation in London. Shabnam Freeman-Powell's in Walthamstow for us, which was the scene of one of the biggest counter-protests overnight. And Shabnam, we're talking there with Mari about a change in tone overnight. Of course, David, offsetting that a little bit with the latest in Northern Ireland. What's it like where you are?
Well, people here in Walthamstow are quite happy that things didn't kick off in the way that was anticipated yesterday. I've just been speaking to a few of the people that work on this market stall, some of them saying that they had to close up early yesterday, losing out on money, worried that far-right protesters would be marching down the streets of Walthamstow. But instead, we saw huge counter demonstrations, thousands of people turning up, they say, to stand up to racism and say that the far-right is not welcome here in London. There was also counter demonstrations in other cities too, for example, Brighton, Bristol and Liverpool. But it does seem that the one that took place here in Walthamstow was one of the largest. And it comes as police had been gearing up, I would say, to face some of the far-right protests that we had thought would be taking place yesterday. There were a few skirmishes with small pockets taking to the streets, but largely the Metropolitan Police said that it was peaceful. We do have a clip that I can play for you now from the head of the Met Police, Sir Mark Rowley, who was speaking about the importance of unity.
It was a massive policing operation. I'm really pleased with how it went, and we put thousands of officers on the street, and I think the show of force from the police and frankly the show of unity from communities together defeated the challenges that we've seen. And it went off very peacefully last night. A couple of locations we had some local criminals turn out and try and create a bit of antisocial behaviour, and we arrested a few of them. But it was a very successful night, and the fears of sort of extreme right disorder were abated. So a successful operation thanks to communities and police.
Now, these counter demonstrations come as lots of those who have been arrested for some of the violent unrest that we've seen over the past week will now appear in court over the course of the next few days. And it also comes as some anti-racism campaigners have been saying that this may not be over just yet. A few days ago, a group of 80 anti-racism campaign groups formed a letter to Keir Starmer. In that letter, they say it's clear that this eruption of racism has long been simmering under the surface, saying that it's important that the real concerns are addressed.
Shuman, great stuff. Thanks so much, Shuman, for Empower there for us in Walthamstow. And as we mentioned, Mel Stride from the Conservative Party will join us shortly to discuss the latest on the riots. But now time for all the day's other top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Taylor Swift's upcoming concerts in Vienna have been cancelled after two men were arrested over an alleged terror plot. Austria's Chancellor described it as a bitter disappointment, but thanked police for their decisive action. Here's our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer.
Welcome to the Eras Tour. She is the biggest star in the world on the highest grossing concert tour of all time. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour currently on its European leg, attracting the attention of millions of fans and also, according to Austrian authorities, an alleged target for two individuals who appeared to be plotting a terror attack. The singer was due to play 3 nights at Vienna's Ernst Happel Stadium over the coming days, a big venue which can fit around 65,000 people. Now cancelled after authorities arrested a 19-year-old man, suggesting Swift's shows had been the focus of the plot, describing the man as someone who'd been radicalised on the internet. A second person also detained, who it's believed had been in contact with the suspect. In a statement, the concert's organisers explained, with confirmation from government officials of a planned terrorist attack, we have no choice but to cancel the 3 scheduled shows for everyone's safety. Fans who were excited, disturbed to learn of what could have been on the cards. For the singer, it is already a troubling, traumatic time, coming after the Southport killings at a Taylor Swift dance event. On social media, she said she was at a complete loss for how to convey her sympathies. Processing that, and now this. Her team certainly wouldn't want to take any chances. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
US President Joe Biden has said he's not confident of a peaceful transfer of power to Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris if Donald Trump loses the election in November. He made the comments during an interview with CBS News.
If Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath. Have to be a stolen election. Look what they're trying to do now in the local election districts where people count the votes. They're putting people in place in states that they're going to count the votes, right? You can't love your country only when you win.
BAFTA is reviewing awards given to Hugh Edwards, but confirmed the BBC can keep their award for royal coverage of Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding, which was fronted by the former newsreader. Edwards confirmed making indecent images of children last week, with 7 of the 41 images being of the most serious type. He's due to be sentenced next month. At least 40 people have died and 5 are missing in northern Yemen after heavy rainfall and flooding. More than 500 homes had to be evacuated and roads were blocked by the flooding in the Hodeidah province. The United Nations have said they're working to get aid to thousands of families affected. And the number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded by a charity in Britain has doubled in a year. The Community Security Trust says there were nearly 2,000 incidents between January and June. Well, Dave Rich, the head of policy at the charity, says it's concerning.
This anti-Jewish hatred is affecting all parts of Jewish life in this country. It's affecting schools, universities, synagogues, and just ordinary people on the street or in workplaces. And it's really unacceptable that this kind of racism should affect ordinary Jewish life in what has for many years been a very happy and very active Jewish community. The fact that this is carried on for so long after the October 7th attack last year suggests it's not going to go away anytime soon, and that this reflects some kind of new reality for the community.
Leah, thank you there for all of the top stories. Well, the race to replace Rishi Sunak as Conservative Party leader is, of course, well underway, and one person who hopes to take the reins is the former Government Minister Mel Stride, who joins us now. Very good morning to you, Mr. Stride.
Good morning, Will.
Thanks for joining us. Let's touch on the riots and the events of the last 10 days first, if we can. Are you encouraged by the news flow overnight?
Yes, undoubtedly, because there could have been 100 incidents across the country, and it appears that there's been very little violence last night. I think that is a tribute to the police. I think they have done a very good job in getting in amongst the situation, taking robust policing, getting that balance right, and also, of course, getting the judiciary involved, getting people through the courts. We've already seen some sentences meted out already as a clear deterrent to those that would otherwise get involved in this mindless thuggery that we've seen over the last few days.
Is it also, therefore, at least in part a tribute to the government? I mean, it's one of those topics in the last couple of days, been asking many of your fellow Conservatives, and there's been some slightly different answers about whether this is a moment where you step back and ultimately back the government and applaud them for the work that they're doing, or whether you want to nitpick at minor details.
So this has been a really difficult moment for our country, a moment of fairly acute crisis. And I do think, and I think this is the point you're making, that in those situations, it's very important that oppositions and everybody in public life does what they can to be moderate and take robust action, certainly, but also be moderate in the way that we approach it. And I think that does extend to the view that one takes of the actions of the government. The reality is that the police have done an extraordinarily, I think, good job in very, very difficult circumstances. The reality is that the judiciary has stepped up. We have seen a number of people, hundreds of people now arrested. We've seen people going through the courts. We've seen sentences meted out. That has been a deterrent, and I think we should recognise that as a success.
Was your fellow leadership candidate, Robert Jenrick, on this show an example of someone who wasn't moderate enough and supportive of enough?
Well, I think you might be referring to the remarks that Robert made about
I'll read
the
them
use of
precisely.
the term.
He said, I thought it was quite wrong that somebody could shout Allahu Akbar on the streets of London and not be immediately arrested.
Well, I would disagree with that position, because I don't think that in all circumstances that somebody shouts that term on a street in London, they should immediately be arrested. Now, that doesn't detract from the fact that where there is clear intimidation, where there is clear incitement to violence, engagement in violence, etc., that there shouldn't be a robust response. And Robert and I are in total agreement in terms of not tolerating any of that kind of behaviour. I think one element of this debate that has been skated over and shouldn't have been actually are the remarks made by Nigel Farage, for example, when the terrible incident in Southport first occurred. His suggestion that the police might have not been telling the truth about that situation, I think, helped fuel conspiracy theories around what was happening, was deeply unhelpful. I think linking what happened in Southport with the terrible incident that happened regarding a uniformed soldier in Kent over the last week is also a very unfortunate linkage, and particularly suggesting that perhaps terrorism might have been involved when the authorities are saying that it hasn't. And I think those things are examples of the kind of language and interventions that at a moment of crisis are deeply unhelpful. And I think that's why we need level heads and moderation, as well as very firm action. And we have seen very firm action.
That's very interesting to hear you say that as regards to some things Nigel Farage said. But just to come back to the line from Robert Jenrick, I mean, your comment there that followed it was to say, I don't think in all circumstances saying Allahu Akbar should be seen as wrong. Surely it's the other way around entirely, that in very, very few circumstances where there are a lot of other factors at play, it can be something that could even vaguely be considered to be in the wrong. Your statement to Sky News yesterday, I said, I think the suggestion of wholesale criminalisation of the words Allahu Akbar is unwise and insensitive. You don't want to go further than that?
Well, no, what I'm saying, Wilf, is very clear, is I just don't agree with the statement that says that effectively under all circumstances where somebody shouts those words that translate as God is great or God is the greatest, that they should be immediately arrested. I just don't think that is an appropriate position to take.
He came out later in the day and rather than apologise or retract the statement, he sort of tried to explain it and justify it. Is he someone, if you won and became party leader, that you'd like to put back in the position he used to have, immigration or shadow immigration?
So, look, I'm not going to speculate about what any candidate might do in the event that they win and the kind of shadow cabinet they might construct. Look, I'm not going to get into that, Wilf. I mean, the reality is I've made my statement about what I think the situation should be around this particular issue of the use of that language on the street. I don't think it should automatically lead to an arrest. I accept, of course, there are certain circumstances or contexts in which, for example, that language might be being used at the same time as a number of illegal and unlawful actions being taken. And then, of course, arrest might be appropriate. But the term itself is typically used within Islam in a gentle and positive way. It's used within the process of religious observance. It's often used as a positive statement in itself. So I don't think we should be in a position where we're saying, well, anybody who uses those words on the street in London, shouting, to be fair, was the term used, should automatically be arrested. I just don't think that is an appropriate position to take. Now, I've made that position clear and I really say no more than that.
In terms of the leadership race and what you hope for the Conservative Party going forward if you were to win, is this a 10-year plan? Could it be a 4 or 5 year plan before the Conservatives are back in power, or is that unrealistic?
So, Wilf, if we have the right leader who unites the party and does the hard yards of the policy platform development that we will need to reach out to those people that we lost to reform, and there are issues there around migration, net migration, lower taxation, but equally appreciate the fact that we've got to reach out to those Labour and Liberal Democrat voters who were previously Conservatives. We've got to do both those things. If we can do that and we can reform our party machine so that it is a really powerful, dynamic, local campaigning machine, and that needs a lot of reform, and we need to do one in the elections in May as a consequence of that reform, then we can get back in one term. This is a government that got in with the lowest share of the popular vote of any government in history. In fact, of those that were able to vote in this election, only 1 in 5 voted Labour. It is quite possible for us to turn this around in one cycle and to win the next general election. But we need the right leader to do that fundamental change that the party needs now in order to get into contention.
Thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Vladimir Putin has described a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's southwestern Kursk region as a large-scale provocation. Russia's foreign ministry says Ukrainian shelling has killed at least 2 people and injured 24 others. Ukrainian officials have remained silent about the scale of the operation. Well, let's bring in now our Russia correspondent, Ivor Bennett. He joins me now. Ivor, Kira Rudik also remained quiet about this, as you might expect. Talk us through what we do and don't know at this stage.
Yeah, morning, Wilf. So it's hard to verify exactly what's going on in this region of Russia that borders Ukraine. The details are very much shrouded in the fog of war. But the reports suggest, and the pictures we're seeing suggest, that this is a very significant incursion indeed by Ukrainian forces inside Russia, one of the largest so far of the war, and it's now entering its third day. So it started on Tuesday with an aerial assault combined with a ground offensive. There were rockets, drones and missiles being fired over the border by Ukraine, accompanied by tanks and fighters on the ground. It all centered around the town of Sudzha, around 330 miles southwest of Moscow. It's very hard to verify the exact numbers involved because, as you say, no word at all from the Ukrainian side, complete silence on this whole offensive. Russia is talking, though, and initially its Ministry of Defense here said that 300 Ukrainian fighters were involved, but then last night that was updated to around 1,000, and that came from the chief of Russia's general staff, Valery Gerasimov, during televised comments he made to Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, when he was updating him on the situation. And during those televised comments, as you might expect, he also talked up Russia's defence. He said the Ukrainian offensive had been stopped and that their forces would be pushed back to the border. But I have to say that there are conflicting reports around how successful their defence has been, because last night, for example, the local governor of this Kursk region declared a state of emergency, and there are reports that Ukrainian forces hold the majority of this border town of Sudzha, and there are reports that they've gone as far as 25 kilometres inside Russia. Now, if that's true, that would mean that in the last 48 hours they've claimed more territory than they did during their entire summer offensive last year. So they appear certainly to have caught Russia's forces off guard here, because these kind of ground incursions do not happen very often. They're very, very rare indeed. But what exactly is happening here? Is it just a raid by Ukraine? Is it an attempt to shift Russia's forces away from other parts of the front where Kiev is under pressure? Or is it an attempt to hold this territory inside Russia and potentially trade it in any future peace negotiations with territory that Russia holds inside Ukraine? All very interesting, all very mysterious, and it comes, of course, after a sustained period of Ukraine being on the back foot on the battlefield.
Ivor Bennett, thanks so much. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, standing together, thousands of anti-racism protesters turn out to challenge far-right rallies. We'll speak to an anti-racism activist next.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll speak to an anti-racism activist after thousands of people took to the streets to protect the targets of far-right rallies overnight. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Thousands of anti-racism demonstrators gathered across the country last night to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. More than 6,000 specialist police had been mobilised amid fears of a repeat of the violence seen around the country over the past week. The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's world tour has been cancelled after 2 men were arrested over an alleged terror plot said to be targeting the events. The pop star was due to play in the Austrian capital over the next 3 nights. US President Joe Biden has said he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Republican nominee Donald Trump loses the race to the White House. He was speaking to CBS News. Mr. Biden referred to previous comments made by his predecessor, who suggested the only way he'd lose the election is if it's stolen from him. And a world-first gene therapy used to treat a life-limiting blood disorder will soon be available on the NHS. The medicines watchdog says the treatment could represent a potential cure for people living with a certain type of severe sickle cell disease, which can lead to severe anemia.
Yeah, thank you. More now on the counter-demonstrations in cities across the country, and we're joined now by anti-racism activist Iman Aitan. Iman, thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you. I guess there's been interesting developments that we'll come to in a moment overnight, but just sort of wanted to roll the clock back initially. And what do you think was the initial cause for all of the riots and disorder that we've seen? Not so much the catalyst, but the root cause.
Okay, so I appreciate that you wanted me to keep it succinct, but there's plenty of nuance.
Yeah,
I'm sure
of course.
You can imagine what. All right, so if you wouldn't mind, I'll get to your point if you wouldn't mind, but I just want to say one thing. So first and foremost, the protests. See, you do it. Riots.
Oh, sorry, I've been talked to at the same time, Iman. Our mic, we need to sort out your mic, which we're coming to do in a moment, which is coming in at the moment. So our apologies that we didn't have the right mic on you initially. Here it comes. We don't need to make the cables look perfect, guys. Let's just get to the interview now.
We're not precious. We're not precious.
We're fine now. I think the mic is now active, so you can continue with the thought.
Amazing. So I just wanted to say, I know that you asked me originally in terms of the catalyst for these riots. I wanted to say that first and foremost, they were basically a grand display of racism, Islamophobia, violence, chaos, bigotry, and so they were just ultimately disgusting and they just took over the UK. So I think we can all agree on that. What I wanted to say is that it's really hard for me to say that I'm going to tar everyone with the same brush. And I think that that's what's happening at the moment when we think of the different conversations that have taken place. We look at these riots. That's why I call them protests, because I'm like, oh, see, there's dynamics, there's nuance, Wilfred, right? So when I think about these riots, they remind me of many different dynamics in regards to the BLM movement. So as we know, I was an organiser of the BLM protest of 2020. My biggest protest was 20,000 people. And within that protest, there were several different ideologies and cohorts. So we had the extremists, we had the reformists, we had the non-political everyday person who was just there to support the cause, right? Then we had those that were bored, looking for a bit of excitement, a bit of energy to their lives. Then we get to the serious point. We had those that felt confident enough, due to the movement, to be overtly racist. And then we have the covert racists, those that know it or don't, that were inspired and emboldened by said overt racists. And last but not least, we have the troublemakers. So moral of the tale is that all of those cohorts, all of those ideologies, all of those beliefs were represented within the BLM movement. And I do believe it is not dissimilar to the riots/protests that we have today. I think it's really it would be remiss of me with that knowledge to say that everyone is the same and to tar everyone with the same brush. And so to answer your question, I do apologise. I know that was a very long-winded answer. To answer your question in terms of the catalyst, I think that they lost, I'll answer your question, but they lost legitimacy in 4 main areas as far as I'm concerned, this kind of movement, this riot. First and foremost, they kind of galvanised under one umbrella, which is this the poor immigration policy, which is connected to the crimes, the rates of crimes that come as a result. And that is due to the Tory party, as we know. And I find it quite annoying that we've had a Labour Party for the last, 3 weeks, and basically it's very little time to actually rectify these issues, and yet protests/riots have taken place. So that, in my eyes, you lose legitimacy in terms of your cause. Secondly, the fact that you decided, not all, many cohorts, or some cohorts, decided to use Elsa, Alice and Bibi's name to inflict and just commit sheer violence. And that is diabolical in and of itself. And I just want to make one more point, if you wouldn't mind, because I'm sure we're probably running out of time by now. I'm a talker, as you can probably tell. There is this dynamic at the moment in terms of this perceived issue of favouritism towards marginalised communities.
So and that two-tier policing.
For example, exactly. So with two-tier policing, we have the NHS, we have housing, we have EDI, we have policing, like you said, two-tier policing. And so that, in my personal opinion, is completely and utterly misguided and incorrect. And that is another reason as to why they have lost legitimacy, because there is facts that counter said sentiment. So and then last but not least, the violence. So, yeah, please.
Well, this is what makes it really complicated.
Yeah, the nuance.
How do you then, how does the government, how does the police, how do communities then have a very honest, clear conversation about how you tackle this?
OK, so first and foremost, I'll start with the police.
The right tactic? Have they been covering it in the right way?
We've got a couple minutes left.
Oh, OK, perfect. Thank you for telling me. So I'll just say this very briefly. Two-tier policing. I just want to say that there is no such thing. There's three-tier policing. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Why? Because police adapt. They adapt, they adjust depending on their circumstances, depending on what's needed. And what tends to happen is people forget the fact that police need to be completely confident that they can complete an arrest safely without kind of escalating the situation, without causing harm to themselves, to their colleagues or to the public, and complete that process. And the bigger the crowd, the harder it is for that process to be achieved. And this is why we may kind of compare the kind of large Palestinian protests versus the Israeli protests. So in terms of two-tier policing, yes, there is. And there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 because they adjust. And in terms of BLM, and there's... No, we've run out of time. Oh, no, I'm sure we've run out of time. Is there I will talk. I will talk. I'll stop.
I mean, I guess just the rounding off question I had was, do you see, signs of turning a corner overnight from your experience of, as you said, being such a central part to the BLM things? Do you think the worst of it's behind us, or is it far too early to say that?
No, it's the lack of consciousness. We're not... without kind of going off on too much of a complex tangent, we're not aware of the fact that every human being has prejudice. It's a part of our brains. It's how we simplify the world around us, and that prejudice includes prejudice based off of gender. So prejudice is simply a preconceived opinion. And so we all have it. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, there's too much people here because this is my country and I love it. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong, as we know, obviously, is when you riot. But I think how we move forward is about being conscious of the fact that we all have prejudice, black and white, and Indian and Southeast Indian, or Southeast Asian, rather. We all have it, and therefore we have to find ways to circumnavigate it. So that's the first point. And then in terms of how we move forward, politicians. Don't even get me started on that. Politicians need to watch out for their language.
Have you considered...
They are causing so much hell.
Have you considered going into politics directly yourself?
I think I'm hated a lot. And I'm a centrist, I'll be honest. I'm genuinely a centrist. This is why I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, because I was an organiser of the Black Lives Matter protest, and I'm a centrist. And yet everyone said, oh, these extremists, these abolitionists, Wilfred, they're taking over. No, I'm a centrist. I'm talking about the David Lammy review. I'm talking about the Angelini review. So I think we need to just get conscious, and I think that's... Get conscious without feeling guilt. I sound a bit right-wing, but I am a centrist. Get conscious without feeling guilt and accept the fact that we need to move forward without politicians stoking the flames with their extreme language, because it filters from the top and goes all the way down, and next thing you know, everyone feels empowered to start being overtly racist or overtly prejudiced towards trans, towards Palestinians, towards Israelis, towards Jews, towards whoever. It's this lack of consciousness. This is why we've gone to the extreme. We're following these overt racists. We're following these extremists. Sorry, I'm going to stop there.
We are out of time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Hundreds of people in England with a life-limiting blood disorder are set to benefit from a world-first gene editing therapy after it was given the green light for use in the NHS. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins us now with some more of the details on this. Thomas, is it fair to say groundbreaking step?
Yes, it's hugely significant for people living with the blood disorder beta thalassemia. Now, they have inherited a faulty gene, which means they don't produce enough hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen around the body. And they are severely fatigued. They also have a shorter life expectancy, and they have to have blood transfusions every few weeks. But this new treatment, the first to be based on a highly precise gene editing technique, means that they will have access to a drug called Casgevy. And in this treatment, doctors remove stem cells which produce red blood cells from these patients. They then use molecular scissors to very precisely cut the DNA, disabling this faulty gene, and then pop the cells back into the patients. And in clinical trials, 90% no longer needed blood transfusions, certainly for at least a year. And that has raised hopes that this will end up being a cure. But it's extremely expensive. And initially, NICE, the cost-effectiveness watchdog for the NHS, said it just wasn't worth the £1.6 million list price. But they've now done a deal with the manufacturers, brought the price down, and that has allowed treatment to 460 patients on the NHS. But there is big hope that this now will pave the way for people with another blood disorder called sickle cell to get access to the drug. At the moment, the talks between the NHS and the manufacturers have stalled over a discount, but this should pave the way. Highly expensive, but highly effective.
Thomas, thanks so much. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we will be discussing the latest in the Olympics, including the bronze medal for Jessica Roberts and the women's team there yesterday with her sister.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Becky Johnson, a Sky News Midlands correspondent based here in Birmingham. Allegations of exploitation in Leicester's clothing factories aren't new. In fact, it's been an open secret in this city for years. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
We're getting more and more stabbings, and essentially I think it's more and more younger children.
Here in the diverse industrial heart of England, we hear from people who have real stories to tell. Parents are going to complain like this. These protests are being organised primarily by people who aren't parents at the school.
We have to be prepared that patients will die from this illness.
The River Severn is still rising and people here in Ironbridge have been told it could go up by another metre. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. Team GB brought home 3 more medals at the Olympics yesterday, most notably Matthew Hudson-Smith's second-place finish in a down-the-wire men's 400-metre final. Our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, caught up with him in Paris just moments ago.
Here at Team GB House in Paris is where all the medalists come to celebrate, and 3 more medals were secured yesterday, and I'm joined now by one of them, Matthew Hudson-Smith, the first medalist in the men's 400 metres at an Olympics for Team GB since 1996. Silver for you. Congratulations. How you feel in the morning after?
Lack of sleep, but great. Honestly, just grateful and really happy, you know, that I executed the best of my abilities on the day and, you know, came away with the silver. You know, the 1% of the 1%, really. Just grateful.
Everyone was watching with you, that final 50 metres. How tough was it out there? Quincy sort of coming in and just catching you.
Yeah, me and my coach were talking before the race, and it was like, it's going to come down to the last 50, and it literally did. He spoke into existence. Just as I was about to make my move, he literally made his literally 2 steps before, and yeah, I put my foot out wide, and that was it. That was that was literally the race, and that's the difference between a 43.40 and a 43.44. But honestly, it was we had the perfect game plan, and yeah, it's sports at the end of the day, and there's only one winner, but it is what it is. And like I said, the 1%, the 1%, and I came away with the silver.
Because it still was beating your own European record time.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I am the first European athlete to ever break the sub 44, and I've done it now twice in a year, and probably going to do it again, and for many more years. So, you know, that's history in itself as well, and it's going to keep going.
You say many more years. That means you're already starting to look forward now.
Yeah. I'm definitely planning for, you know, LA. You know, season's not over. Definitely got, you know, the Diamond Leagues, and got the 4x4 going up now, so I'm just getting ready for that, and my focus is now switched from, you know, the 400 individual to the 4x4 to get another medal.
And now you've had a run in the Stade de France here at the Olympics. What was it like suddenly seeing your parents in the stadium amongst all the GP flags?
Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster. I didn't realise they were coming, and when I saw them, it just kind of broke me a little bit. But, you know, definitely for my friends, my family, and they've been with me every step of the way, and definitely not just for myself, but I do what I do for them as well, and I'm just grateful and happy that, you know, I can deliver and just show my abilities, and, you know, not reach my full potential yet, but I'm coming agonizingly close to it now, so yeah, I'm just happy.
Is this where you hope people might be inspired by where you come from the physical, the mental and the financial challenges just to make it to the Olympics?
Yeah, I mean, just keep fighting a good fight, really. I mean, this is sports, and sports is like it's like real life. Everyone has their ups and their downs, and hopefully, you know, my story can inspire people just to keep fighting a good fight, and, you know, never give up on your dreams. And at the end of the day, if you have a dream, just chase it, because you never know what it might lead to. And sometimes the journey is just as nice as the outcome, and my journey's been one hell of a journey. So yeah, and the journey's still getting wrote, so I'm just going to keep going, keep fighting.
What does it take to fight, to persevere, to sort of go through where others might doubt you?
Yeah, there's been a lot of doubt. Definitely a support network. Like I said, I've not just my friends and family, I've got, you know, my coaches, my agents. Just the support network's been absolutely crazy, and just to drag me from the bottom to now, like, to get to where I am now, I wouldn't be where I am without them. So a support network and just belief, because you know there are going to be times when you doubt yourself, and there are going to be times where you're not feeling like you are where you should be. But sometimes just that ounce of belief and then having someone else who also believes in you is all you need.
I suppose now you've got the silver medal from an Olympics. Some of those who might not have backed you, hopefully they'll now be coming on board.
It is what it is. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like I said, I do it for the people who helped me get to this position now. So although they might be on board, I've always got to remember who got me to this position. So yeah.
And your great friend, former housemate Noel Lyles, has he been in contact since last night? Have you been supporting him out here as well?
I saw his 100 metres. That definitely did spur me on as well. I haven't looked at my phone, to be honest with you. I've been so dead focused on the task at hand, and I'm probably got like a whole load of messages that I've got to get back to. Like my agents definitely, and everyone's kind of controlling my social media and my phone, because I'm not really like, you know, I don't want to really get distracted from the task at hand. So I'm literally just, you know, got to go now. Got one medal. It's time to deliver another for Team GB and the 4x4 boys, and keep going.
Lots of messages to reflect on next week, and a medal to collect later on today, and hopefully another one tomorrow.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, that's one of the latest Team GB medal successes, and they'll be hoping for more today to climb up the standings here in Paris.
So with Matthew Hudson-Smith, we're going to stick on the Olympics and talk about the cycling now. One of the medals Team GB picked up yesterday was bronze in the women's team pursuit. And Jessica Roberts was part of the quartet that successfully got the bronze medal there yesterday. Her sister Amy, I'm delighted to say, joins us now, a former pro cyclist herself. Congratulations for you and your family. It must have been a great moment to watch your sister triumph with the bronze.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really amazing for us all to be there. We had a couple of friends there as well. Yeah, it was such a good atmosphere, so it was really nice to be there.
Amy, it's Leah here. Have you managed to speak to Jessica yet?
Yeah, we did briefly see her yesterday after the race. It was all like a lot was going on, but she was just so happy. And it was nice that she came up to us at the top of the track when they finished. So yeah, there's a lot of emotions going on, but everyone's just so proud and so pleased.
What sort of scale of training and effort, both physical and mental, do you think has gone into this to get to this point? And you know, how does that weigh on the family as well, and the extent to which you guys have all had to help her?
Yeah, so much goes into, well, training anyway, any sort of races throughout the years, but the Olympics is obviously the big one. A couple of years before, like they really focus on it. So you put your life into it. Jess lives away from us, so we don't see her much. But it's the sacrifices they need to make to get Olympic medals. So, you know, it's hard work, it's dedication, but things like this that make it worth it.
What do you think have been the building blocks to the success? Because, you know, we've spoken a lot this week about investment, legacy into Olympic sport, particularly the velodrome in Carmarthen, you know, £300,000 investment from the National Lottery. But I wondered your thoughts and reflections on what's made it so brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know, there's lots of things. Welsh cycling itself have really, I don't know, put a lot into it since, I guess, 2012. I think that's made a big difference. So for us Welsh, obviously we've got Emma as well that's medalled and hopefully got more medals to come. Like you say, all the money into the velodrome in Carmarthen. Welsh cycling really helped with the younger age and helped like the building blocks for us coming through. So there's lots of things, you know, there's lots of mentors. They really think about everything. But I guess it's the riders as well, just putting all the hard work in to really get there.
What did you make of the men's team pursuit, where clearly Team GB came second with the silver? Whether or not they would have taken gold or not, there was that unfortunate error from Ethan Hayter later on. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I know. That was such a shame. Like, the race was it was so close. The atmosphere in there was absolutely amazing. I don't know what way it would have gone. It was so close, but you know, the riding, you ride so close to the wheels. Any slight, you know, thing to go wrong is just huge. And obviously, I don't know exactly what happened, but to control the bikes then at that speed, you've got no brakes, you've got no gears. Like for him to even stay up, I don't know how he did that. So it's still, you know, a silver medal. Whether they would have got the gold, I don't know, but it was still a good ride from them.
How do you think, as an athlete, you cope with that disappointment? Because all the training that gets pumped in to, you know, focusing on that gold medal, I suppose, but there must be genuine disappointment when you don't quite reach gold. I don't know if that's a fair question to ask, but just your thoughts, really.
Yeah, I don't know. It's super hard. Obviously, they would have been going for the gold. It was in reach. But it's sport, you know, things like that happen. He just needs to focus now. He's got more races to come. Still getting a silver medal is, you know, amazing. So they've got to be happy with it. But there will be slight disappointment because obviously everyone's there to win. But you've got to be strong, and you know that's what makes an athlete, I suppose.
Amy, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please pass on our congratulations to your sister.
I will do. Thank you very much.
And enjoy the rest of your time in Paris. Hopefully you get to go to lots more events to come. That was Amy Roberts, sister of bronze medalist Jessica Roberts yesterday. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour with all the day's top stories, including reaction to the very latest on the riots across the UK in recent days. Very good morning to you. It is 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's show. Hate not welcome here. The chants heard across the country where anti-racism protesters countered planned rallies by the far right.
Plus, the Met Police Commissioner insists shows of force and unity defeated the challenges the UK has seen over the past week.
But the policing minister tells this programme we should be cautious in thinking that violent scenes are over, with further demonstrations expected in the next few days.
It's Thursday, the 8th of August. Your headlines. Thousands of counter-protesters gather to protect targets of anti-immigration protests after days of rioting.
The show of force from the police and, frankly, the show of unity from communities together defeated the challenges that we've seen.
The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's world tour is cancelled after the arrests of 2 men over a suspected terror plot. Joe Biden says he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Donald Trump loses the US election. Also this morning, why hundreds of patients living with a rare blood disorder have been given hope of a cure. And another big day for Team GB in Paris as Matthew Hudson-Smith secures a silver in the 400-metre final. Very good morning to you. Our top story. Hate not welcome here was the phrase heard at counter-protests across the country as thousands of anti-racism demonstrators gathered to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. Shops were boarded up, immigration law firms shut, and about 6,000 riot police drafted in after warnings of more than 100 far-right rallies. But instead of the violence seen over recent days, streets remained mostly calm, as our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin now reports.
They'd braced themselves for a night of trouble, but in the end it was a largely peaceful evening. Here in Liverpool, they'd boarded up the windows of this asylum centre, fearing a protest by far-right groups would descend into violence. Instead, it was surrounded not by those who wished it harm, but by those determined to protect it.
There's a lot of people in the community here who, feel a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and I think there's the sense of the community where they've had enough. There's also a sense of distrust with the police. A lot of people don't trust the police to defend their neighbourhood, and that's why a lot of them have come out.
Black and white, unite and fight! It was a similar story elsewhere. In Birmingham, anti-racism campaigners marched through the streets.
We've got people from all walks of life. This is what reality looks like. We don't want their reality. We want this reality because this is about peace, love, unity and harmony.
In Bristol, hundreds gathered to repel the planned protests by far-right-led groups.
This is how it should be. Everyone should be united together, all as one.
Yeah. How do you feel about the scenes that we've seen over the last week or so across the country?
I think it's disgraceful, yeah. Absolutely disgraceful, yeah, and it needs to stop.
In Brighton, the feared disruption didn't materialise. The far right did turn out in much smaller numbers than expected at a border force agency in Portsmouth, blocking a road before being moved away by riot police. And thousands of anti-racist demonstrators gathered at an immigration centre in Walthamstow. No clashes here.
It's hard to see how anybody could even get remotely close to this building to do any kind of damage. This community has turned out in their hundreds to mount the most extraordinary defence of this former church.
It could have been the threat of stiff prison sentences handed out to previous rioters. It could have been the increased police presence. If the far right were here, they didn't show themselves. But that is not to say that this is over. Nick Martin, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, from Nick Martin in Liverpool, we'll go to Shabnam Freeman-Powell, who's in Walthamstow for us live this morning, which was the scene of one of the biggest counter-protests. Shabnam, what has been the mood there this morning?
Well, as you can see this morning here in Walthamstow, I'm on Walthamstow Market, and business is back to usual. But yesterday afternoon, many of the market stalls that you can see around me and the shops had to close early because they were anticipating potential violence that we have seen in the streets of England across the course of the past week or so. However, instead, here in Walthamstow yesterday, there were huge counter counter demonstrations with thousands of people turning up, not just here in Walthamstow, but across the country in places like Brighton, Bristol and Liverpool too, counter demonstrating, standing up, they say, against some of the racism that we have seen over the past week or so. Now, police had been preparing for potential violence. We had reports that there are around 6,000 officers on standby, 1,000 in London alone. However, we have spoken to the head of the Met Police, who said that many of the demonstrations yesterday were largely peaceful. We do have a clip I can share with you now where Sir Mark Rowley is speaking about the importance of unity.
It was a massive policing operation. I'm really pleased with how it went, and we put thousands of officers on the street, and I think the show of force from the police and frankly the show of unity from communities together defeated the challenges that we've seen. And it went off very peacefully last night. A couple of locations we had some local criminals turn out and try and create a bit of antisocial behaviour, and we arrested a few of them. But it was a very successful night, and the fears of sort of extreme right disorder were abated. So a successful operation thanks to communities and police.
So as Sir Mark Rowley was suggesting there were some pockets of some far-right protesters. For example, some did turn out in Portsmouth yesterday evening at a border force immigration centre there, blocking roads and holding placards which said things such as "Save our kids." We also saw some protests as well in Croydon, around 50 people gathered there. However, police actually said that wasn't linked to the protests, forgive me, but it appeared to be pure antisocial behaviour. So it was a positive night for police yesterday, who, as I said, were gearing up for potential violence and instead saw thousands of counter-protesters, they say, standing up to racism.
Shaman, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Shaman from Empower there in Walthamstow. Mari's now with me here in studio to discuss the political implications of all this. A more positive tone, clearly, over the last 24 hours from Sir Mark Rowley. What about the tone of the politicians this morning?
Yeah, so I think there is a kind of a cautious sigh of relief, realistically, in government this morning, that we didn't see the kinds of violence and scenes that we've seen unfolding over the weekend and last week as well. So I think there will be some level of crossing the fingers that it's all over, as it were, in Number 10 this morning. But nonetheless, I think Diana Johnson was very keen to insist that we are not out of the woods yet and that there are more events planned for this week that intelligence suggests, and therefore we can't assume that the worst is over. I think we can listen to a clip of her and we can pay attention, as you say, to her tone and the way she's talking in comparison to the way we saw her talk on Sunday.
I am cautious about what happened last night. It's good that we didn't see the level of disorder and criminality on our streets that we have in previous days. But obviously this is just the start. There is now further intelligence of events during the next few days, and we need to see what happens there.
So I think realistically, this was really Keir Starmer's biggest test since becoming Prime Minister. I mean, he's only been Prime Minister a month. But nonetheless, this was a huge moment. And if he had got it wrong or had been seen to have got it wrong or not done enough, he could have really been punished politically for this. So far, so good, I would argue, for the Labour Party. The difficulty will be, as time goes on, as the dust settles, if there is no more unrest and violence, at some point will come the inevitable opposition critiques of the way that it was handled, the speed at which, Cobra meetings were called, for instance, and therefore also there will be a picking apart of the causes, catalysts, and kind of background behind the violence, and trying to understand that. That could be slightly more tricky for Labour.
We had Mel Stride on as well. On that topic, I mean, he's certainly seemingly one of the members of the opposition who still, at the moment, wants to largely give support and backing to the government as opposed to start the picking apart as yet.
Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't want to be the first one to do that. I mean, arguably, Robert Jenrick did that yesterday. It was interesting. I mean, you asked him several times whether he, therefore, would argue that actually the fact that there was so little disruption, violence and unrest last night, could that therefore be seen as actually testament to the government? He didn't want to say that. So he just said, oh, it's testament to the police, it's testament to the judiciary. He was praising everyone else but the government.
Yeah.
Fair enough, he's opposition, that's his job. But what was also interesting was he did have a bit of a pop at Robert Jenrick in terms of Robert Jenrick's comments that have caused a bit of a stir from yesterday on Sky News, where he was talking about those who are shouting the phrase Allahu Akbar in the streets of London in an aggressive fashion should be immediately arrested. And many people are clearly saying, well, that's something that people say in prayer. It's a normal phrase for people to say. So arresting someone just for saying it sounds, slight overkill. And I think we've got a clip of Mel Stride trying to negotiate, critiquing Robert Jenrick while also saying that they're on the same page.
I don't think that in all circumstances that somebody shouts that term on a street in London, they should immediately be arrested. Now, that doesn't detract from the fact that where there is clear intimidation, where there is clear incitement to violence, engagement in violence, etc., that there shouldn't be a robust response. And Robert and I are in total agreement in terms of not tolerating any of that kind of behaviour.
So you see there, Mel Stride. Now, we know that the Tory leadership campaigners have been warned not to kind of mudsling and be too critical of their opponents unnecessarily by the 1922 committee chair, Bob Blackman, saying that there'll be a yellow card system, as it were, if that occurs. So people are being very careful about how they critique their opponents. But nonetheless, he was explaining that he didn't think that Robert Jenrick's comments were appropriate. What was also interesting was he was actually went on to criticise Nigel Farage. And he said that Nigel Farage's suggestion that the police weren't telling the truth after we saw those horrific stabbings in Southport, he said that was deeply unhelpful. And he also talked about the misinformation that Farage was spreading around the attack of a soldier in Kent, I believe, as well. And that's interesting because so far it was only Priti Patel who was overtly criticising Nigel Farage with his criticisms of two-tier policing. Now it looks like Mel Stride is starting to wade into that debate around Nigel Farage. Robert Jenrick not so keen to be criticising Farage because he wants Reform voters to really go to him.
Murray, great stuff as always. Thank you. To Northern Ireland now, where the Assembly has been recalled to discuss violent scenes in Belfast over the last week. Our senior Northern Ireland correspondent David Blevins has more for us.
Well, even before the Assembly recall takes place, this dormant executive, that's the equivalent of the Cabinet in Northern Ireland, will meet to discuss the recent disorder. Ministers will be briefed by the Chief Constable, John Boucher, and that comes after the Police Service of Northern Ireland requested additional support from officers in Great Britain under mutual aid. Now, that's not an uncommon request during periods of disorder in Northern Ireland. It was last made during President Biden's visit to Northern Ireland last year, but it may not be so easily granted given that the disorder is taking place right across the United Kingdom. And following the meeting of the executive, as you say, the Northern Ireland Assembly has been recalled from its summer recess. Members will debate a motion condemning the recent violence and rejecting all forms of Islamophobia, xenophobia and racism, and also commending police and other public sector bodies for the efforts they're making to keep communities safe. Last night we did see some more violence, not on the same scale, and a further 6 people were charged, 3 men and 3 boys, one just 14 years old, all now facing accusations of riotous behaviour.
Blevins there for us in Belfast this morning. Time now for all of the day's other top stories. Leah's back with those.
Thank you, Wilfred. Hundreds of people in England with a life-limiting blood disorder are set to benefit from a world-first gene editing therapy after it was given the green light for use in the NHS. Health bosses have said it's a historic moment for those with the blood condition called thalassemia. Normally, patients with the inherited condition would rely on lifelong blood transfusions, but this new treatment works by modifying a faulty gene in the patient's bone marrow stem cells. Consultant haematologist Dr. Shabnam Chaudhri says it's transformational.
To be able to have this and that too on the NHS is so good. You know, I think we all know about all the health inequalities that have come to surface, particularly post-pandemic. And just to have this life-changing and also such cutting-edge technology on the NHS is going to be transformational. And this brings in a new innovation and technology, brings in more innovation and technology.
US President Joe Biden has said he's not confident of a peaceful transfer of power to Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris if Donald Trump loses the election in November. He made the comments during an interview with CBS News.
If Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath. Have be a stolen election. Look what they're trying to do now in the local election districts where people count the votes. They're putting people in place in states that they're going to count the votes, right? You can't love your country only when you win.
BAFTA is reviewing awards given to Hugh Edwards, but confirmed that the BBC can keep their award for royal coverage of Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding, which was fronted by the former newsreader. Edwards admitted to making indecent images of children last week, with 7 of the 41 images being of the most serious type. He's due to be sentenced next month. At least 40 people have died and 5 people are missing in northern Yemen after heavy rainfall and flooding. More than 500 homes had to be evacuated and roads were blocked by the flooding in the Hodeidah province. Now, the United Nations have said they're working to get aid to thousands of families affected. The number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded by a charity in Britain has doubled in a year. The Community Security Trust says there were nearly 2,000 incidents between January and June. Well, Dave Rich, the head of policy at the charity, says it's concerning.
This anti-Jewish hatred is affecting all parts of Jewish life in this country. It's affecting schools, universities, synagogues, and just ordinary people on the street or in workplaces. And it's really unacceptable that this kind of racism should affect ordinary Jewish life in what has for many years been a very happy and very active Jewish community. The fact that this has carried on for so long after the October 7th attack last year suggests it's not going to go away anytime soon, and that this reflects some kind of new reality for the community.
Let's go to Russia next. Vladimir Putin has described a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's southwestern Kursk region as a large-scale provocation. Russia's foreign ministry says Ukrainian shelling has killed at least 2 people and injured 24 others. Ukrainian officials have remained silent about the scale of the operation. Our Russia correspondent Ivor Bennett joins us now to shed what light we can on it. Ivor, we spoke to Kira Rudik earlier, and I guess as we would expect, she didn't shed much light on it. But what can you tell us?
Well, it's hard to verify exactly what's going on here. Details are quite hazy, quite scarce, shrouded in the fog of war. But what we do know from the reports we're seeing and the pictures we're seeing from this region of Russia that borders Ukraine is that there appears to have been a very significant incursion indeed by Ukrainian forces inside Russia, and it amounts to one of the largest incursions inside Russia of the war so far. It all started on Tuesday, so it's now into its 3rd day, and it was an aerial assault as well as a ground offensive with tanks and soldiers on the ground. It's hard to put an actual figure on the numbers involved here. Initially, Russia's Ministry of Defense said 300 Ukrainian fighters were involved, but then last night we heard from the chief of Russia's general staff, Valery Gerasimov. He said that there were 1,000 Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian troops involved here that have made their way across the border. He was making those comments, they were televised comments, to Vladimir Putin when he was updating Russia's president on the situation. And as you might expect, if there's televised comments, he was talking up Russia's response. He said that the advance by Ukraine had been stopped and that they're going to be pushing those Ukrainian forces back to the border. But I have to say there are conflicting reports about just how successful Russia's defence has been on this incursion. For example, last night the local governor of the Kursk region declared a state of emergency there. And there are also reports today that Ukrainian forces are now in control of the majority, if not all, of the border town of Sudzha, where this incursion has been centred around. It's around 330 miles southwest of Moscow, and there are reports that Ukraine has gone as far as 25 kilometres inside Russia. Now, if that's true, that means that they have taken more territory in the last 48 hours than they did during their entire summer offensive last year. But there's been no word at all from Kiev on this, so we don't know the exact details. So is it just a raid to draw Russia's forces away from other parts of the front, or is it an attempt perhaps to hold territory inside Russia and potentially trade it with Russia with territory that they hold inside Ukraine if there's future peace talks to be had. We don't yet know. All very interesting, though.
Certainly. Fascinating, no less. Ivor, thank you so much. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, it's nearly kick-off time for the English Football League. We'll speak to former players Joby McAnuff and Andy Hinchcliffe about the fans' love of the game. The EFL kicks off, of course, tomorrow, a week before the Premier League. We'll preview all of the football to come, and anti-racism marches face down the far-right rallies. We'll get reaction from former Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chaudhri.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back. The English Football League kicks off tomorrow, and it seems that optimism is in the air for fans of the beautiful game. A survey of thousands shows that more than 60% are feeling hopeful for their beloved team ahead of the 24-25 season, which I guess means a lot will end up being disappointed then, alas, by the end of the season. Let's bring in two former football legends, Joby McAnuff and Andy Hinchcliffe, to discuss this with us. Very good morning to you, gents. Great to have you with us. Before we get to the survey results, the headline is that the EFL, the Football League, kicks off as soon as tomorrow, the Premier League the week later. And it's almost fair enough to argue, I think, Joby, that last year the Championship was as exciting, if not more exciting, than the Premier League.
Yeah, well, we're probably a little bit biased, those of us who work a little bit more predominantly in the EFL, but it always is, incredible seasons that we get in terms of the drama and the action and just how close they come down to at the end of seasons, and those stories that you may not get up in the Premier League. So again, Ipswich Town coming up from League One and going and get automatic promotion was an absolutely incredible achievement from them. And that's up and down, the Championship, League One, and League Two. You get those stories, those surprises, which keeps it so entertaining for everybody.
And Andy, I guess a reason maybe historically why the focus wasn't as big on below the Premier League, not just the Championship, but lower leagues too. One would have been, a thought towards the quality of the football. The other would have just been the reach of it and the understanding of the teams and the stories unfolding there. But that's really changed over the last couple of years on both levels.
Yeah, I think the pull of the Premier League is absolutely enormous. The very best players in the world are playing in the Premier League, so it's no surprise that it's hugely popular. It's a brilliant league. But the EFL, and in particular the Championship, we're seeing attendances go up. There's more people coming through the gates to actually go to the games. Our coverage is growing and growing in terms of viewers. We're seeing more and more people tuning in. I just think the interest is there. And as Joby said, I think it's just the excitement that you get with the EFL, the unpredictability of the EFL. But the quality is certainly there as well. We're seeing a lot of players, young players, come out of the Premier League and on loan signings and stepping down into the EFL. And that's, of course, for the benefit of the EFL and the Championship in particular, that the quality of football, we're getting a lot of good young coaches kind of learning their trade and learning their craft in the EFL as well. So I think the standard of football across the EFL has really ratcheted up in the last maybe 5 years. The quality of player has improved and the stories just keep coming. We just think season after season it can't get any better, yet it still does. It's just the attraction of the EFL is enormous.
Joe, but the other thing as well, I think, is the pace of English football throughout all of the tiers. I mean, I spent some time in the US and the MLS, they're doing their best, but it's very slow. Serie A is pretty slow pace. So even if the Premier League is the top quality in England, I think it's so exciting on all levels because it's a very fast-paced game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just going back to your previous point in terms of the style of football, and I think there was probably a bit of a narrative around lower league football over the years that it was sort of, long ball, fast, kick it up to a striker. That has all changed completely. Having played in all of the leagues, I can say from my own experience, in terms of the coaching, the tactical element and the technical element, you only have to look at the likes of MK Dons, Crawley Town. If you want to look at a couple of teams that played some of the best football that you're going to see in any of the leagues, including some Premier League teams, they've got fantastic ability to go and get on the ball. So I think that's all changing now. And again, in terms of that development for younger players, I think that is where it really does stand alone, because we know it's difficult for Premier League clubs to blood young players because there's so much at stake. And you're talking about the world-class level. But you only have to look at the England team in the last Euros and for the last few years, how many of those players have really made a start alongside other players in the EFL that really gets them going and gets them moving in terms of the right direction to professional football.
But you also look at, say, the standard of the pitches as well, and a lot of young coaches in the game as well, forward-thinking coaches, attack-minded coaches as well. So I think the football we're seeing in the EFL is very forward-thinking. Mm-hmm. Teams want to outscore each other. We don't see them just keeping the ball in their own half that we might see in the Premier League a little bit, or the big leagues across Europe. So I think every game that we cover, there's always something happening because teams want to attack and want to score goals.
Well, just quickly on that note, to wrap things up, Andy, I mean, that I guess there's also something that's changed, is the coverage of it, the number of games you're able to watch on TV and the quality of the cameras and the pitches there. When does everything kick off? The Sky Sports first game is when?
It's on Friday. It's on tomorrow. We've got Blackburn against Derby, and that's the first game in what is a busy weekend. It's going to be a really busy season for the players, for the pundits as well. We've got huge amounts of games to cover. It's absolutely fantastic. Sky's new deal with the EFL, it benefits them enormously, and we're going to work very hard as pundits to bring all the analysis and all the stories, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well, in terms of the communities, what the clubs do in their communities as well, from the Championship down to League Two. So it's an exciting season, whether you're attending games, whether you're watching games, or whether you're working on games.
And just finally, very quick one before we go to each of you. I know you both agree with me that Arsenal are the best team in the Premier League, but give us a dark horse call from either of you for promotion to the Premier League in the season ahead.
Well, I'm going to go, it's not a massive dark horse, but Sheffield United, who have been a bit under the radar, really disappointing season last year, but good signings this summer, and Chris Wilder, I think they're going to be a team that's right up there this season.
Yeah, I think Leeds are everyone's favourites, but I'm looking at Luton as well. I think Rob Edwards is He's a great coach. I think he's a real motivator as well. That club have been through a lot with what happened with Tom Lockyer. They've had promotion, they've had relegation. But I think Rob Edwards at Luton could do the job again and get them promoted back to the Premier League.
I'm just going to throw Coventry in there as well as a dark
And
horse.
Middlesbrough.
There we go. Joby and Andy, great to have you both on it, and I'm glad that you didn't push back on the fact that Arsenal are the greatest team in the world. So that's locked and loaded. Gents, good to see you. Thanks so much. Now, Taylor Swift's upcoming concerts in Vienna have been cancelled after 2 men were arrested over an alleged terror plot. Austria's chancellor has described it as a bitter disappointment, but thanked police for their decisive action. Let's go to our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer. Katie, talk us through how this unfolded, and I guess when it was confirmed that these Swift concerts would be cancelled.
This all emerged last night when Austrian authorities put on a press conference to give us a bit more detail about exactly the conclusions that they'd reached and the arrests that they'd made. We're actually expecting a police press conference within the next hour, so we should have a bit more detail on what exactly they've been looking at. But yes, the concert organisers have taken the decision that they decided it is in everyone's interest to cancel tonight's concert at the Ernst Happel Stadium in Vienna, tomorrow's concert and Saturday's concert as well. It comes after these 2 arrests have been made of a 19-year-old man who was arrested about an hour outside of Vienna. The detail that they gave us initially was that he is an individual that they believe was radicalised on the internet, and a second person has also been arrested who was in contact with that man. We don't know the exact details of exactly what or is alleged to have been plotted, but all we know is that Austrian authorities were taking this seriously enough that they felt the need to announce these arrests, and certainly organisers are taking it seriously enough that they've taken the steps now to cancel it. We can't stress really how big a deal the Eras concert is. It is the biggest all-time highest grossing tour that's ever been. Taylor Swift has taken this tour around the world, including to the UK. She's due to come back here and do the Wembley concerts next week. I think certainly she will be absolutely gutted that she wouldn't have been able to put on these shows. Fans come from all around the world to come and see her. We've been speaking overnight to many a fan who's travelled all the way over from America, Australia, who are absolutely understandably gutted that they won't be seeing the show. But I think there is an overwhelming sense really that they are just grateful to the Austrian police for being on top of this and nobody coming to any harm. So we will yet to hear from Taylor Swift herself on this, but I think her team clearly wanting to take this very seriously.
Katie, thanks so much. Katie Spencer there for us back in Sky HQ. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, stuck in space, why these 2 astronauts who were only supposed to be on the International Space Station for 8 days may be there quite a bit longer. We'll have that story for you next. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up shortly, we'll be joined by former Scotland Yard Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chaudhri to discuss the riots we've seen over the course of the last 8 or 9 days. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories. He's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Thousands of anti-racism demonstrators have gathered across the country last night to protect places under threat from far-right rallies. More than 6,000 specialist police were mobilised amid fears of a repeat of the violence around the country over the past week. The Vienna leg of Taylor Swift's tour has been cancelled after 2 men were arrested over an alleged terror plot said to be targeting the events. The pop star was due to play in the capital over the next 3 days. US President Joe Biden has said he's not confident in a peaceful transfer of power if Republican nominee Donald Trump loses the race to the White House. Speaking to CBS News, Mr. Biden referred to previous comments made by his predecessor, who suggested the only way he'd lose the election is if it's stolen from him. And a world-first gene therapy used to treat a life-limiting blood disorder will soon be available on the NHS. The medicines watchdog says the treatment could represent a potential cure for people living with a certain type of severe sickle cell disease, which can lead to severe anemia.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much. Let's pivot back to our top story, and that is, of course, the riots over the course of the last week and a half across the UK, and indeed the counter-protests which took note yesterday. The former Scotland Yard Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chaudhri joins us now to discuss all of this. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. How do you rate what the police have done, how they've handled things over the last 10 days?
Well, it's been a really difficult and challenging week for policing across the whole of the UK, with a significant number of officers that have faced abuse, bricks, bottles, some serious injuries amongst those officers. And then you had yesterday evening with the protests that were allegedly 100, apparently from the far right. And Britain came out united with peaceful protests across all parts of the UK, with just a few number of arrests. So I say that they've handled it brilliantly. I think that we have to give huge credit to communities who've come together with policing, because without the police, the public, the police would have had some real challenges in addition to that they've had to deal with. So certainly ended on what I would say a positive note yesterday evening, but must not get complacent. There are further riots planned in the next few weeks, starting tomorrow right through to September the 14th, as I understand it.
Talk us through how hard it is to police a riot that starts getting aggressive and violent, and I mean, how much has to be down to the individual officers there in the moment to make the right choices, which presumably there could be many different ways things could go?
Yeah, absolutely. But what we have to remember is these officers have to work in unison and as a team. They're especially trained to manage public order situations. They have tactics that they can deploy. The frontline officers will have shields. Some officers behind them won't. They have to open their shields like a door, in essence, in order to effect some of those arrests. Many of those won't happen at the time, they'll happen subsequently. They have body-worn cameras which are operating all the time. They use social media and all the other footage that they can get in order to effect those arrests. You cannot allow officers to go off on their own, because they are at serious risk of assault and serious injury by many of these violent offenders and these thugs, as the Commissioner of the Met Police has announced this morning. Very difficult, but what I would say is the thousands of officers that come to police these protests and the violent disorder that you have seen played out are specially trained. Some of those officers will be they'll be newly trained, and so they may have policed some, football events and so on, but this is going to be a huge challenge for them, because it's something they've probably never experienced. Many of these officers weren't even in policing when you had the 2011 disorder that we saw back then.
I know you expressed just, that cautious optimism about things overnight being less bad to the previous 8 or 9 days. I wonder the extent to which that might be linked to the fact that we have now seen not just arrests made and charges brought, but some people pleading guilty. Do you think that leads to a quite immediate effect across society when you've worked on similar sorts of riots, violent protests of this in the past? Do you think seeing people get punished and then those guilty pleas coming through makes a big difference across society?
I'm not sure that it makes a huge difference, but I do think it has made a difference. But you have to add that to a combination of things. This is just my thoughts on it, but I think that a lot of what the protests that they were coming out to these offices of the asylum seeker offices, the solicitors' offices and so on, I think a lot of this was scaremongering, and I think that the far right had hoped that it would be just the Muslim communities in particular that would come out and defend their properties. I think they had the shock of their life when they realised that Britain stood up united, people from all colours, faith and backgrounds attended those protests because they're not having it. They've realised in the last week that some of the assaults and the violence they've seen against police officers, but also people purely based on the colour of their skin, is absolutely not acceptable. They know that many immigrants come into this country and they work incredibly hard. You have doctors, nurses, you see people that do from low-paid jobs to the highest-paid jobs that all come from these type of backgrounds. And I think that Britain has stood united against that. I think that there will be some momentum generated in the next few weeks of further arrests. The Commissioner announced today, just in the Met alone, something like 20 arrests have been made. 70% of those are have already got criminal backgrounds. So that's the kind of people that you're dealing with. So these people that want to come out and commit damage and violence will still continue to find a way into these protests and be violent. So be prepared for that in the next few weeks.
Shabnam Chaudhri, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
2 astronauts who were only supposed to be on the International Space Station for 8 days may now be there until next year after problems with Boeing's Starliner craft that took them there. NASA says it's discussing potential plans for them to return on a SpaceX craft in February 2025. Let's speak to our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. Thomas, is it easy for them to stay there till February 2025?
Look, I don't know whether Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams had plans for Christmas and New Year, but they may well have to cancel because of the problems with the Starliner spacecraft. Now, as you say, they were supposed to be there for 8 days. We're now on day 63. They may not be home until a SpaceX craft comes back from the International Space Station in February. And the issue is to do with the thrusters and the helium leaks that have really caused huge problems on this spacecraft. It was the first test flight, crewed test flight up to the space station, and Boeing and NASA have been doing simulations on the ground trying to work out what has gone wrong. Now, Boeing says it's safe to fly. It can bring the astronauts back home. NASA is less confident and clearly not prepared to put astronauts in danger, particularly as Bill Nelson, the boss of NASA, was actually on board the last space shuttle before the Challenger disaster in 1986, which had a devastating impact on him. And of course, he's not going to put anybody else in danger. But there is huge problems. So they've had to fly more food, more clothes for the extra 2 people on board. It should have a crew of 7 on the International Space Station. There are now 9. They want to get that back down as soon as possible. They're trying to work out how the next SpaceX launches in September. Do they reduce that from 4 to 2 on board so they can bring home Sonny and Butch to enjoy Christmas and New Year with their families?
Really, really interesting, Thomas. I look forward to the updates in the weeks and months to come. Thomas Moore there for us. A man of many talents, covering all sorts of different scientific-related topics for us today. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, why these 2 are taking on the extraordinary challenge of rowing the entire length of the Amazon. That's coming up after this break.
Do you know what kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
And the pollen report first, which this morning will be windy with low cloud, hill and coastal fog and outbreaks of local heavy rain spreading from the southwest. But eastern England and northern and central Scotland will stay mainly dry. Rain will spread to the rest of Britain this afternoon, turning heavy in the north. The unsettled conditions mean pollen counts will be moderate for most, high in the drier southeast, low in the colder north. That's your pollen report.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Team GB brought home 3 more medals at the Paris Olympics yesterday, most notably Matthew Hudson-Smith's second-place finish in a down-to-the-wire men's 400-metre final. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris caught up with him in Paris earlier today.
Here at Team GB House in Paris is where all the medalists come to celebrate, and 3 more medals were secured yesterday, and I'm joined now by one of them, Matthew Hudson-Smith, the first medalist in the men's 400 metres at an Olympics for Team GB since 1996, silver for you. Congratulations. How you feel in the morning after?
Lack of sleep, but great. Honestly, just grateful and really happy, you know, that I executed the best of my abilities on the day and, you know, came away with the silver. And, you know, the 1% of the 1%, really. Just grateful.
Everyone was watching with you, that final 50 metres. How tough was it out there? Quincy sort of coming in and just catching you.
Yeah, me and my coach were talking before the race, and it was like, it's going to come down to the last 50, and it literally did. He spoke into existence. Just as I was about to make my move, he literally made his 2 steps before, and yeah, kind of I put my foot out wide, and that was it. That was that was literally the race, and that's the difference between a 43.40 and a 43.44. But honestly, it was we had the perfect game plan, and yeah, it's sports at the end of the day, and there's only one winner, but it is what it is, and like I said, the 1%, the 1%, and I came away with the silver.
Because it still was beating your own European record time.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I am the first European athlete to ever break the sub 44, and I've done it now twice in a year, and probably going to do it again, and for many more years. So, you know, that's history in itself as well, and it's going to keep going.
And now you've had a run in the Stade de France here at the Olympics. What was it like suddenly seeing your parents in the stadium amongst all the GB flags?
Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster. I didn't realise they were coming, and when I saw them, this kind of broke me a little bit. But, you know, definitely for my friends, my family, and they've been with me every step of the way, and definitely not just for myself, but I do what I do for them as well. And I'm just grateful and happy that, you know, I can deliver and just show my abilities, and, you know, not reached my full potential yet, but I'm coming agonisingly close to it now. So yeah, I'm just happy.
Is this where you hope people might be inspired by where you come from the physical, the mental, and the financial challenges just to make it to the Olympics?
Yeah, I mean, just keep fighting a good fight, really. I mean, this is sports, and sports is like it's just like real life. Everyone has their ups and their downs, and hopefully, you know, my story can inspire people just to keep fighting a good fight, and, you know, never give up on your dreams. And at the end of the day, if you have a dream, just chase it, because you never know what it might lead to. And sometimes the journey is just as nice as the outcome. And my journey's been one hell of a journey. So yeah, and the journey's still getting wrote. So I'm just going to keep going and keep fighting.
Well, to a different type of sport now, and our next guests are about to set off on an extraordinary challenge, rowing the full length of the Amazon River. Darren Clausen and Simon Evans are attempting the feat as a fundraiser for the Great Ormond Street Hospital Children's Charity. A very good morning to you both. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning.
Simon, I'll come to you first with this challenge. The two of you rowing the entire length of the Amazon. Just give us some of the distances and the time and how long this is all going to take.
Well, it's a little over 3,500 miles. But before we even get to the start line, we've got about a 500-mile little paddle just to kind of get the boat where it needs to be.
Just to warm yourselves up.
Just to warm ourselves up. The record is 30 days. We're looking to break that at, we think, around 27 days if everything goes smoothly.
So a little bit of breathing room there.
Yeah.
The reason behind this, Darren, is you want to raise money for Great Ormond Street. Talk us through why.
Basically, my son, when he was 2 years old, became very seriously ill, was having lots of seizures, and was transferred into Great Ormond Street. He was having probably about 100 seizures a day, and after several months of being in Great Ormond Street, they was able to stabilise him and get him home. So from my perspective, it's a way of kind of paying back Great Ormond Street for saving my son's life.
And the experience you had with them, talk us through that, and I guess the shortage they might have of funds like this, that they can always benefit from significantly more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Great Ormond Street is probably the best hospital in the world, and we're really super fortunate to have that here in London. They are currently trying to build the new Children's Cancer Centre, which they need about £300 million to do. So all of the money that we're going to be raising as a part of our expedition will be going towards building that.
And Simon, why did you guys come up with this as the particular challenge? Is this something that you've wanted to do for a while? Talk me through it.
So we've done a number of challenges over the years. Darren especially has been doing this for, what, 15, 20 years now? Yeah, 15 years, yeah. So there's been like jungle marathons, and the last one that we did was rowing across the Pacific, which took us 43 days. And then we kind of figured that maybe we'd done enough. We've sort of raised over £250,000 for charities, and we just suddenly thought, well, what about inflation? We need to maybe do one last escapade, and I'm not quite sure who came up with it, but, you know, the Amazon is one of the last kind of, you know, trodden wildernesses out there, so...
Well, inflation is the reason. Let's hope for your sakes we don't get another bout of inflation in a couple of years to come, because these things come round about. But Darren, talk me about the sort of drive you need in these moments? It's going to take you 27 to 30 days. It's going to be, I have no doubt, absolutely brutal. The reason you're doing it, is that something that just drives you on through those tougher days?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, physically, it's going to be extremely difficult, the environment, the heat, etc. And at the points that you really start to struggle, it's certainly from my perspective, it's very easy to just kind of cast my mind to the reason for it, thinking about Great Ormond Street and the children that are in there, and that kind of drives you forward.
Simon, when do you set off and how can people contribute?
Yeah, so we set off next Wednesday, but it takes us a while to get to where we need to be. So we're looking to kick off the Amazon section of that around about the 1st of September. People can follow us on Instagram, just search for Endurance Limits, and then our Just Giving page, which, again, just search for Amazon Row.
Gents, wishing you the very best of luck in the endeavour. Come back and tell us how it went in, I guess, 27 days' time, plus that time to travel. Simon and Darren, thank you very much. Well, that does it for us here on The Breakfast Show today. Thanks so much for watching. Gareth Barlow's up with the Sky News Today team next.